If something happens to me, call Raven. Dana Whitfield stared at those 7 words written on the back of a photograph at 1:37 in the morning, her hands trembling. A young woman she had never met, barely breathing 20 feet away. She didn't know who Raven was. She didn't know if calling him was smart or reckless or the worst decision she'd ever make. She only knew that the girl on that table had no one else. So Dana picked up the phone and dialed. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, please subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment below and tell us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The night had been quiet up until the moment it wasn't. Dana Whitfield had worked the overnight shift at Desert Valley Medical Center for 11 years, long enough to know the rhythms of a hospital after midnight. The way the hallways narrowed down to something almost peaceful. The hum of machines settling into a low background conversation. The sound of shoes on linoleum that told you everything about how someone's night was going before they even reached the nurse's station. She knew the difference between a night that would ask something of her and a night that would leave her mostly alone. She had learned to feel it in her chest before anything happened. That night, something already felt wrong before the paramedics came through the door. She couldn't explain it. She had tried later when people asked her how it all started, and she always came back to the same thing, a feeling she had no word for, something between dread and recognition, like the moment before a storm when the air goes perfectly still and every instinct in your body understands what the silence means, even if your mind hasn't caught up yet. She was restocking a medication cart near the end of the east corridor when she heard the ambulance bay doors fly open. And the sound that followed wasn't the controlled urgency she was used to. It was something sharper. 2 paramedics talking over each other, their voices riding just below panic. She was already moving before the radio crackled. The young woman they brought in was maybe 25, maybe 26. Blonde hair matted against her face. Pale in a way that suggested she had been pale for a while before tonight. Not the sudden pallor of acute crisis, but the slow drain of something sustained and prolonged. She had no purse, no identification, no phone. The paramedics had found her collapsed outside the hospital's own parking structure. Not in the lot, not on the sidewalk out front, but specifically outside the structure, as though she had been trying to reach the building and run out of whatever had been keeping her upright before she made it. Jane Doe, mid-20s, found unresponsive, no ID vitals, unstable. One of the paramedics said, handing off the chart clipboard with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had delivered this sentence, or something close to it many times before. No visible trauma on arrival, but BP is concerning, and she's got bruising on both forearms, old bruising and what looks like older bruising on her rib cage. We didn't do a full assessment. She coded briefly in the rig. We got her back. She say anything? Dana asked. 3 words. She said, "Don't let them." That's it? Then she was gone again. Don't let them. Dana took the clipboard and followed the gurney into the trauma bay and began doing what she had been trained to do, which was focus on what was measurable and immediate and leave everything else for later. Blood pressure, oxygen saturation, IV access. The sequence of steps that constituted stabilization, the process by which a body in crisis was coaxed back toward something that could sustain itself. She worked efficiently and she worked fast, and she did not think about the 3 words because there was no time to think about them yet. The attending physician on duty, Dr. Harold Voss, arrived 4 minutes after the page. He was 53, a lean man with wire-rimmed glasses in the slightly compressed manner of someone who had learned a long time ago to contain his emotional responses during the acute phase of treatment, because the emotional responses would either help or hurt later, and there was no way to know which until later. He reviewed the preliminary assessment without speaking, checked the bruising Dana had already noted, and found more inner arms, shoulders, a pattern that took him less than 30 seconds to characterize, and that made something in his face go very quiet in a particular way Dana recognized. "Get Dr. Okafor paged," he said, and his voice was professionally neutral, "and we're going to need photos documented before she's moved or cleaned up further." Dana understood what he was saying. She nodded and she made the page and she continued her work, and she did not let herself feel anything about it yet because there was still too much to do. It was 40 minutes later, when the young woman had been stabilized enough to be moved to a monitored room, when the immediate crisis had plateaued into something manageable, that Dana went through the small canvas bag that had been found alongside the woman's body. Protocol. looking for identification for medication lists for anything that might tell them who she was and who to contact. The bag was mostly empty, a lip balm with no cap. A crumpled receipt from a gas station dated 4 days ago. $43 in cash folded into a tight square, and at the very bottom of the bag, folded into thirds and worn soft along the crease lines, a photograph. It was a photograph of the young woman, clearly her maybe 2 or 3 years younger. Her face open and unguarded in a way that the face Dana had been working on for the past hour was not. She was standing beside a motorcycle, one hand resting on the handlebars, laughing at something off camera. Beside her stood a man, large, broad-shouldered, wearing a black leather vest with patches on the front and back. The patches Dana couldn't quite read in the worn light of the photograph. His arm was around her shoulders, and he was laughing too genuinely, the kind of laugh you couldn't manufacture for a camera. Dana turned the photograph over. The handwriting on the back was careful, not rushed. Someone had taken their time with these words, which meant they had thought about them before they wrote them, which meant they had known this message might one day need to be found and understood by a stranger. If something happens to me, call Raven. Below that, a phone number with an Arizona area code. Dana stood holding the photograph for a long moment. Around her, the hospital continued its overnight rhythm. Monitors beeped. Someone down the corridor called out a room number. The fluorescent lights hummed their perpetual indifferent hum. She thought about what she was supposed to do, which was contact the social work team and the hospital's patient advocacy office and wait for morning when more resources would be available and protocols could be followed in proper sequence. Then she thought about a young woman saying, "Don't let them," in a photograph worn soft from being folded and folded again, in the careful handwriting of someone who had known enough to be afraid and had left this note anyway, had planned for this possibility anyway, had trusted that whoever found it would do something with it. Dana went to the break room where it was quiet and she dialed the number. It rang twice. Yeah. The voice was low and rough in the way that voices get at. She checked the clock, 1:37 in the morning, but there was something else underneath the sleep-roughened quality. An alertness that came on fast. The kind of alertness that had learned to arrive quickly because it had needed to. "I'm sorry to call at this hour," Dana said. She was surprised by how steady her own voice was. "My name is Dana Whitfield. I'm a nurse at Desert Valley Medical Center. I'm looking for someone named Raven." A pause. 2 seconds. 3. "You found her." It was not a question. Dana's grip on the phone tightened. "We found a young woman. No identification. She's alive, but she's in serious condition. I found a photograph in her bag with your number on it. The note said to call you if something happened." Silence again. But this silence was different from the first one. This one had weight to it. Dana had the strange sensation of being on the line with someone who was processing something enormous and doing it very quietly and very fast. "What's your name again?" he said. Dana Whitfield." "Dana." He said her name once like he was placing it somewhere. He'd remember it. "How bad?" She had been asked this question many times in her career in many different ways. She had learned to calibrate her answers to be honest without being crushing, to give people enough truth to work with, without using truth as a weapon. But something in his voice told her that what this man needed was not calibration. What he needed was the real number. "She coded in the ambulance," Dana said. "She's stable now, but she's still critical. There are signs of significant physical trauma, not just from tonight, prior injuries. Multiple." The silence that followed this was the longest one yet. Dana heard him breathing, slow and deliberate, as though he was making a conscious choice about each breath. "She say anything?" he asked. 3 words, Dana said. "Don't let them." Something happened on the other end of the line. She couldn't name it precisely. It wasn't a sound exactly, more a quality of the silence shifting, contracting, becoming something denser and more purposeful, like a decision being made. "Tell me what hospital," he said, "and tell me the address." Dana told him. "I'm coming," he said. "I need you to do something for me until I get there." "What?" "Don't let anyone move her. Don't let anyone transfer her. Don't let anyone who isn't hospital staff near her room. If someone shows up and says they know her, or says they're her family, or says anything about taking her somewhere else, you call me before you do anything. Can you do that?" Dana should have said that wasn't her decision to make. She should have said that there were protocols and supervisors and a chain of authority that governed these situations. She should have said a lot of things. Instead, she said yes. Good. Another pause, then quieter with an undertone she couldn't quite categorize. What does she look like right now? Is she... He stopped, started again. Is she peaceful? Is she comfortable? Something tightened in Dana's chest. She had not expected that question. She had been braced for something more tactical, more logistical. Not that. She's resting, Dana said carefully. She's not in pain right now. Okay, a long exhale. Okay, I'll be there as fast as I can. The line went dead. Dana stood holding the phone for another moment, then set it down and went back to her patient and checked every monitor twice and told herself she had done the right thing, even though she had no way of knowing yet whether that was true. The first thing Dana noticed when she returned to the young woman's room was that she had moved. Not much, not significantly, but her head had turned slightly on the pillow, and her left hand, which had been lying flat, was now curled loosely at her side, the fingers slightly bent, as though she had reached for something in a dream and not quite found it. Dana checked all the readings. Stable, concerning still but holding. She adjusted the IV line and noted the time on the chart, and stood by the bed for a moment longer than strictly necessary, looking at the young woman's face. She was pretty in the way that people are pretty when they've spent a long time being tough. A beauty that didn't announce itself, that had learned to stay quiet. High cheekbones, faint freckles across the bridge of her nose, a small scar above her left eyebrow that had healed clean, which meant it had been treated properly at some point, which meant someone had cared for her at some point. These were the details Dana noticed and couldn't stop herself from noticing. The details that made a Jane Doe into a specific human being with a specific history. "Who did this to you?" she said quietly. Not really expecting an answer, just needing to ask. The young woman didn't answer, but something in her face shifted almost imperceptibly, some micro-tension releasing, as though some part of her registered that she had been spoken to directly, had been addressed as a person, and that this was something that had not happened to her in a while. Donna tucked the blanket more securely around her shoulders and went back to work. Dr. Voss came to find her at 2:15. "You spoke to someone," he said, and his tone was neutral, but his eyes were not. "There was a note in her personal effects," Dana said, "with a phone number. The note said to call the number if something happened to her. And you called it." "I did." He looked at her for a moment. Harold Voss had not gotten where he was by being naive about situations, and he was clearly assessing this one with the full weight of his experience. "Who answered?" "A man named Raven. He knew who she was immediately. He's coming to the hospital." "Raven. Yes." Another long look. "Did he say anything about who she is? What happened to her?" "No, he said to make sure no one moved her before he got here, and to call him if anyone showed up claiming to be her family." Dr. Voss was quiet for a moment. He looked at the chart in his hand. Then he looked at Dana in a way that suggested he was doing math in his head, adding up a set of figures he didn't entirely like the sum of. "The bruising pattern on her forearms and shoulders," he said carefully, "and the older rib fractures that didn't get proper treatment. You understand what that pattern is consistent with?" "I understand," Dana said. "And someone tried to transfer her already." He said this slowly, deliberately watching her face. Dana's head came up sharply. "What? 20 minutes ago, before I came to find you, a call came through to the main admissions desk, someone claiming to be with a private medical transport company, asking about a Jane Doe brought in tonight, wanted to know if she'd been stabilized and if she could be transferred to another facility for ongoing care." He paused. "The desk clerk appropriately referred it to me, and I declined to provide any patient information. But I want you to understand what I'm telling you." Dana understood exactly what he was telling her. The understanding settled into her stomach like something cold. "Someone already knows she's here," she said. "Someone already knows she's here," he confirmed, "which means someone was watching. Or someone has access to information that they should not have." He set the chart down on the nurse's station counter and looked at Dana directly. "You made a judgment call tonight that fell outside standard protocol. I'm not going to tell you that was wrong, but I need you to tell me whether the person you called is someone who is going to help the situation or complicate it." Dana thought about the voice on the phone, the alertness that had arrived fast, the question he hadn't needed to ask because he'd understood immediately. The way he'd said, "I'm coming," not as a threat, not as a promise, but as a fact as simple and immediate as gravity. "I think he's going to help," she said. Dr. Voss studied her for another moment. Then he picked up the chart and tucked it under his arm. "We'll see," he said, and walked away. He arrived at 3:48 in the morning. Dana heard him before she saw him, not because he was loud, which he wasn't, but because she heard the motorcycle, a deep, sustained rumble that rose and then cut off in the parking structure across from the emergency entrance. And then less than 2 minutes later, she heard boots on the linoleum of the corridor, a long, even stride, unhurried and unself-conscious, the stride of someone who had long ago stopped worrying about whether people noticed him walking into a room. She saw him come through the double doors of the emergency wing, and she understood immediately why the photograph had been worn soft along its crease lines. Jackson Cole was physically striking in the way that very few people are not handsome exactly, though there was that too, but something more than handsome, something that came from the combination of size and stillness. He was easily 6'2", broad through the chest and shoulders, with gray hair pulled back from a face that had earned every line on it and kept them without apology. His arms were covered in tattoos from the wrists up, the ink dense and layered, old work and newer work intertwined, and over a dark Henley shirt he wore a black leather vest covered in patches, the most prominent of which bore the name and insignia that Dana had seen in the photograph and now recognized immediately. What she hadn't expected was the expression on his face. She had braced herself for intimidating. She had prepared herself for a version of this man that matched the reputation she was already mentally assembling. A dangerous man, a man with a complicated history, a man who commanded a room through force of presence and left people uncertain about whether to stand their ground. She had her professional composure ready, her calm, clear voice, her ability to establish authority in her own domain that she had developed over 11 years of doing exactly that. What she saw instead was a man who was afraid, not theatrically, not openly. He was controlling it with the practiced discipline of someone who had learned over many years to keep fear from showing, because showing fear in certain situations had costs that he couldn't afford. But Donna had sat with afraid people through enough long nights to know what fear looked like under a mask, and this man was afraid quietly and completely, in a way that told her this woman in the monitored room down the hall meant something to him that went beyond what she could account for from a phone call and a photograph. He came directly to the nurse's station. He found her with his eyes before he reached the desk. "Dana Whitfield," he said. It was confirmation, not a question. She had given him her name on the phone and he had kept it. "Mr. Cole," she said. Something in his face shifted slightly. Either she'd gotten the name right and he was registering that, or the formality surprised him. "Raven," he said. "Just Raven." He put his hands flat on the counter in front of her big hand's knuckles that had healed crooked in places. "Where is she?" "She's in a monitored room. She's stable but still critical. I need to ask you some questions before I can take you to her." He looked at her steadily. He didn't push. He didn't argue. He waited. "Can you tell me her name?" "Emily," he said. "Emily Carter." Dana wrote it down. "What's her date of birth? Do you know her address? Is there family I should be contacting?" "No family," he said, and he said it in a way that closed that door firmly. "No living family. I'm who there is." He paused. "I'll get you her date of birth and everything else you need. But first, who called asking about transferring her?" Dana's pen stopped moving. She looked up. His expression hadn't changed. It was still controlled, still calm, still the face of a man holding something large, very carefully so it didn't get away from him. But his eyes were different. Something had arrived in them, something precise and watchful and absolutely focused. "You know about that?" she said. "I don't know about it yet," he said. "But I knew it would happen. That's why I asked you not to let anyone move her, so it happened already." "How long after you called me?" "The call came in about 40 minutes after I reached you." 40 minutes. He processed this. They knew she was here within 40 minutes of her arriving. "It seems that way?" He was quiet for a moment. His hands on the counter were absolutely still. Was the caller a man or a woman? A man, according to the admissions clerk. What did he say exactly? He claimed to be with a private medical transport company. Said he was calling about a Jane Doe brought in tonight and asked whether she'd been stabilized and whether she could be transferred. He didn't give the company name, or if he did, nobody wrote it down. "I'm going to want to find that out." He straightened up slightly and looked at her with something that might have been reassessment. You didn't give him any information. The attending physician took the call and declined to provide any patient information. Good. He said it with a quiet finality, and then I need to see her. Dana had walked with many people down many hospital corridors to rooms that contained news they were afraid to receive. She had learned the particular quality of silence that surrounds a person in those moments, the way the air seems to compact around them as they walk, the way the ordinary sounds of a hospital, the distant intercom, the soft chime of an elevator, the squeak of a cartwheel seemed to intrude on something private and fundamental. She had learned to give people that silence without filling it. She gave it to Raven. He walked beside her, and he didn't speak, and she didn't speak, and they reached the room, and she pushed the door open and stood aside. He went in slowly, not cautiously, purposefully. He came to the side of the bed and stood there for a long moment, and Dana watched him look at Emily Carter, and she watched his face do something complicated and private that she looked away from because it wasn't hers to witness. When she looked back, he had pulled the chair from the corner of the room and placed it precisely beside the bed and sat down in it, and he had taken Emily's hand, the one that had been curled at her side, reaching for something in her sleep, and he was holding it in both of his, carefully like something that could break. Hey kid, he said very quietly, I'm here. Emily didn't wake, but that hand moved, almost imperceptibly. The finger shifted around his, a fraction of an adjustment, an unconscious response, a body recognizing something even through the depth of sedation and trauma and whatever ordeal had brought her here. Her fingers settled around his. Dana stepped back out of the room. She stood in the corridor and pressed her back against the wall and let herself take 3 full breaths before she went back to the nurse's station. 11 years. She had been doing this for 11 years and she still hadn't learned not to feel it. She was not entirely sure that was a problem. Raven came out of the room 40 minutes later. He had not paged her. He had not asked for anything. He had simply sat. Now he stood at the nurse's station with his arms crossed, and something had changed in his face. The fear was still there, but it had been joined by something else, something quieter and more deliberate. And if Dana was reading it correctly, more dangerous in a specific sense, not in the sense of threat, but in the sense of intent, in the sense of a man who has decided something and is now in the process of making it real. I need to tell you something, he said, and I need you to listen without making any decisions about it until I'm finished. All right, Dana said. Emily didn't end up here by accident, he said. She didn't get sick. She didn't have a random crisis. Somebody put her in this condition. Somebody who knows she's here now and who called your hospital 40 minutes after she arrived, which means they either have someone inside this building or they have access to information systems that they absolutely should not have. The people who did this to her are going to try to finish it. I don't know exactly how yet, but I know that they are going to try. He paused, watching her face, giving her time to react, or to argue, or to do what people often did when presented with information this alarming, which was to contract toward a more comfortable version of it. Dana did none of those things. She held his gaze and waited for the rest. I'm going to make some calls, he said. Some people are going to come here. Not tonight, tomorrow, probably as the day goes on. A lot of people. I need you to understand who they are before they get here so that when they arrive, you're not making decisions based on how they look. How will they look? Dana said. Something shifted in his eyes. Like me, he said simply. Dana looked at him, the vest, the tattoos, the patches, the face that had taken its history in the open and kept it there. She thought about what it meant that this man had arrived alone in the middle of the night and gone into that room and held a young woman's hand for 40 minutes without being asked. And she thought about the question he had asked her on the phone. Is she peaceful? Is she comfortable? And she thought about what category of person asked that question in that moment. Call whoever you need to call, she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he said something she wouldn't be able to repeat exactly later because it was too simple and too direct to quote without diminishing it. He said, she saved my life once, a long time ago. She could have kept driving. She didn't. Donna waited. She sat with me on the side of a highway for 2 hours in the rain until the medics got there. She didn't know me. She didn't know who I was or what she was sitting down next to. She just knew I was hurt, and she stayed. He looked back toward the closed door of Emily's room. I've been trying to figure out how to pay that back for 7 years. Dana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Tell me everything you know about what happened to her. He told her, not all of it. Some of it he didn't know yet, but what he knew and what he suspected and what the pattern of evidence pointed toward when you laid it out in sequence and looked at it honestly. He told her that Emily Carter worked for a medical transportation company called Meridian Care Transport. He told her that approximately 6 months ago, Emily had begun to notice discrepancies in patient records, patients being logged as transferred to facilities that when Emily quietly checked, had no record of receiving them. Patients who disappeared from the documentation chain. A pattern that once you saw it could not be unseen. She came to me about 2 months ago, he said. She told me what she'd found. I told her to be careful and to make copies of everything and to not let anyone know she was paying attention. His jaw tightened. She made copies. She sent backups to people she trusted, but somehow they figured out she was watching anyway. What happened after that? She went quiet. That's what we had agreed. If she felt unsafe, she'd go quiet. She'd stop communicating through normal channels. She'd keep her head down. I heard from her 3 weeks ago. She was okay, but scared. She thought someone had been in her apartment. She didn't know what to do. His voice stayed level, but each word carried a compressed weight. Then nothing, for 3 weeks nothing, and now this. Dana absorbed all of this. She was not, she realized, as surprised as she should have been. The bruising pattern, the older injuries that hadn't been treated, the fact that someone had called 40 minutes after her arrival, the 3 words Emily had managed to say in the ambulance. Who is behind it, Dana said. The company. Who runs Meridian Care Transport? Raven's expression changed. Not dramatically, a narrowing, a settling, a focusing. A man named Richard Colton, he said. He's got holdings all over the state. Healthcare companies, property development, some political donations that go in interesting directions. He's got a reputation for being a successful businessman and a philanthropist and a man who gets things done. You think he knows about the scheme? I think he built the scheme, Raven said. I think he's been running it for years. And I think Emily Carter found the proof. At 4:30 in the morning, with the conversation at a point where both of them had run out of what they could usefully say to each other and were left with what they couldn't yet do anything about. Dana went back to check on Emily and found her awake. Not fully, not clearly. She was hovering at the surface of consciousness, her eyes partially open, the expression on her face moving between several things in rapid succession: confusion, fear, a reaching toward lucidity that kept being pulled back under. Dana came to the bedside immediately. Emily, she said, careful and clear, making her voice the kind of voice that says, you are in a safe place and I am someone who will not hurt you. My name is Dana. You're in a hospital. You're safe. You don't have to say anything right now. Emily's eyes tracked toward her. The fear in her face didn't entirely leave it compressed, became watchful, became the fear of someone assessing rather than someone fleeing. Her lips moved. Dana leaned in. Raven, Emily said. It was barely sound, a shape made by lips and breath, but it was unmistakable. He's here, Dana said. He came as soon as I called him. He's been here for hours. Something happened in Emily's face. The watching, assessing quality didn't disappear. That was too deep in her right now to be dissolved by 2 sentences, but something behind it gave way slightly, like a wall with a hairline crack that had just become a fraction wider. Her eyes closed. She was going back under. But before she did, she said something else. Donna was close enough to hear it clearly, and she heard it clearly, and it stayed with her for a very long time afterward. They'll come back, Emily said. They always come back. Her eyes closed and her breathing deepened back into the rhythm of sedation, and Donna stood beside her for a moment and looked at her face, the face of a young woman who had found something she wasn't supposed to find and had paid an enormous price for it, and was lying in a hospital bed in the middle of the night, still afraid, still braced, still waiting for something to come through the door. Dana went and found Raven in the corridor. She woke briefly, she said. She asked for you, and she said something I think you need to hear. Raven's eyes were already on her, already intent. She said they'll come back, Dana said. She said they always come back. Raven stood absolutely still for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and took out his phone and looked at it for a moment and put it away again. Then we make sure someone is here when they do, he said. He said it quietly. He said it with a complete and settled certainty that was different from bravado. different from threat, different from the kind of declaration that needs an audience. He said it the way you say something that has already been decided, something that is already in motion, something that is less a choice than a statement of what is going to happen regardless. He took his phone back out. He began to make calls. Though Dana did not hear the calls. She went back to her work and let him make them in the corridor. And over the next hour, she checked on Emily twice more and conferred with Dr. Voss and completed her charting and did all the things that a professional does to move through a night that has become larger than she expected. But in the pauses between tasks, in the moments when the corridor was quiet and she was near the east wing where Raven was standing and making calls in a low, steady voice, she caught fragments. Get to Marcus. Tell him to get to Doc. I don't care what time it is. Wake him up. Not looking for trouble. Looking for a wall. Tell them Emily needs us. She heard that last one twice. Emily needs us. Said in the same tone both times, the same flat declarative certainty, as though this phrase was itself a sufficient explanation, a complete set of instructions, a thing that required no further elaboration, because the people on the receiving end of it would already understand what it meant and what it required of them. At 5:15 in the morning, as the first gray edge of light was beginning to define itself against the darkness outside the hospital's east-facing windows, Raven came back to the nurse's station and sat in the one chair that was there and looked at Dana with an expression that was tired in the way that people are tired after they have made every decision that needed making and are now waiting for the decisions to become reality. People are coming, he said. How many? Dana said. He thought about it. More than you're expecting, he said. Give me a number. He looked at her steadily. I put out the word to every chapter within range, he said. I called the road captains directly. I told them what happened and what I need. He paused. A conservative estimate, 300, maybe more. Dana looked at him. He looked back at her. 300 bikers, she said. 300 and some, he said. Give or take. It'll take a few hours. Some of them are coming from Tucson, some from Flagstaff. A couple of chapters from the other side of the state might make it by this afternoon. Dana thought about Dr. Voss. She thought about the hospital administrator who would arrive at 7. She thought about the parking lot, which was not designed for this. She thought about what 300 motorcycles arriving at a hospital sounded and looked like, and what conclusions a reasonable person might draw from that image. What do you need me to do? She said, because she had already decided somewhere between the phone call and the corridor and the room where Raven had held Emily's hand that she was on a particular side of this and that she was going to act accordingly. I need you to not be afraid of them, he said. They're coming because someone asked. They're not coming to cause trouble. They're coming because Emily Carter doesn't have anyone else, and she does now, and I need the people in this building to understand the difference between 300 bikers who are here to protect someone and 300 bikers who are here to threaten someone. Is there a difference? Dana said, not unkindly. Always, he said. One of them I'd send away. The other one I called. Dana nodded slowly. She picked up her pen and pulled the notepad toward her. I'm going to need to brief the day shift administrator before they get here, she said. I'm going to need something to tell him that isn't 300 Hells Angels are coming to the hospital. Tell him, Raven said, that a patient has people who love her, and they're coming to stand with her. That's the truth. His voice was even and his face was steady, and for a moment he looked, Dana thought, not like a man to be afraid of at all. He looked like a man who had learned over a long and complicated life the specific weight of loyalty, and who was now in the process of demonstrating it. The rest of it, the vests, the bikes, the numbers, that's just what it looks like. Dana looked at him across the counter of the nurse's station, with the gray morning beginning to come through the windows and Emily Carter breathing steadily in the monitored room down the hall. And she thought that in 11 years she had seen a great many things in this building and had long since stopped being surprised by what people were capable of, the worst of it and the best of it. The cruelty that could be done in silence, and the extraordinary, unreasonable, difficult, stubborn thing that human beings could sometimes do for each other in the dark. She thought about a young woman sitting on the side of a highway in the rain for 2 hours next to a man she didn't know because he was hurt, and she couldn't drive away from that. She thought about what it had cost Emily Carter to do that, and what it had given her, and what it had set in motion across 7 years, and whether any of it, all of it, led inevitably to this particular morning in this particular corridor with this particular man who was making calls in the pre-dawn dark to summon something enormous inhuman and undeserved. She thought some debts are worth everything it takes to pay them. "I'll handle the administrator," she said. "You handle your people." Raven looked at her for a moment with something that was not quite a smile, but was in the same territory, a quieter thing, a recognition. "Thank you," he said, "for calling." "Thank you," Dana said, "for answering." Outside the east-facing windows, the sky was going from gray to something that was not yet light, but was the honest promise of it, the space between darkness and morning, where the world holds itself in suspension, waiting for what comes next. Down the corridor, Emily Carter breathed. On the highway and back roads of Arizona, engines were waking up. The first motorcycle arrived at 6:43 in the morning. Dana heard it before she saw it, the low, throaty rumble cutting through the early quiet, distinct from traffic, distinct from everything else, the sound of a specific kind of engine, ridden by a specific kind of person. She was at the nurse's station, finishing a handoff note, when the sound reached her and she stopped writing and looked toward the window at the end of the corridor and saw the headlights swinging into the hospital's main lot. Then another, then two more together. She watched them come in and find spaces and cut their engines one by one, and she watched the men who climbed off them. Large men, mostly some older, some younger, all of them wearing the vest, all of them moving with a deliberate, unhurried certainty that told her they had been told where to come and why, and they had come without needing to ask further questions. They didn't go to the entrance. They didn't cluster at the door demanding information. They found positions in the lot, and they stood there and they waited. By 7:15, there were 23 of them. By 7:45, there were 60. Robert Haynes, the hospital's day administrator, arrived at his usual time of 7:30 and walked directly into a situation that his 17 years of hospital administration had not fully prepared him for. He was a trim, careful man in his mid-50s who wore his authority in the same way he wore his suits, neatly, without excess, with a slight forward lean that suggested he was always moving toward the next problem. He came in through the side entrance, which meant he didn't see the parking lot immediately. He found Dana first. "Tell me what I'm walking into," he said. It was not a greeting. It was the voice of a man who had already read the overnight incident log and had several specific questions. "A patient was brought in at 1:37 this morning," Dana said. "Young woman found collapsed outside the parking structure. No ID. She's been identified now as Emily Carter. She's critical but stable. And the man who's been in the corridor since before 4 in the morning. His name is Jackson Cole. He's the patient's emergency contact. He has legitimate cause to be here." Haynes looked at her. He had a particular kind of look, the look of someone who understands that the sentence they just heard is technically accurate and also omitting something substantial. "Dana, I've already had 3 calls this morning. 1 from a member of the night security team, 2 from the parking lot attendant. I'm going to ask you directly what is happening in my parking lot. People who care about the patient are arriving to show their support," Donna said. A long silence. Then, "How many people?" Dana thought about the honest answer and the strategic answer and decided that after the night she'd had, honesty was the only approach she had energy left for. A conservative estimate as of 20 minutes ago was 80. That number is going to grow significantly over the next several hours. Haynes stared at her. "Mr. Haynes," Dana said, "I need you to hear this carefully. This patient is in danger, not from the people in the parking lot. The people in the parking lot are here because of the people she is in danger from. Someone called this hospital 40 minutes after she arrived last night and attempted to arrange a transfer. Someone tracked her here extremely quickly, which means either there's a breach in our information systems or there is someone inside this building who should not have access to what they have access to. Mr. Cole brought this to my attention last night, and I believe him." Haynes was quiet for a moment. He was doing the administrative math, liability optics, staffing security, the interaction of all these variables with each other. She could see him doing it. Then he said, "Get me Dr. Voss." The 3 of them stood in Haynes's office for 20 minutes. And at the end of those 20 minutes, the hospital's security chief, a retired police officer named Gerald Park, who took his job with a seriousness that most of the staff found excessive, and that now today looked like exactly the right amount of seriousness, was brought in. Gerald Park listened to everything that was said, asked 4 precise questions, and then asked to speak directly with Raven. They stood in the corridor, Gerald Park and Raven, and they were almost exactly the same height. and they assessed each other with the mutual directness of two men who both understood physical reality in the same practical way. And then they had a conversation that Dana was not close enough to hear all of, but that lasted 11 minutes, and at the end of which Gerald Park came back to the group and said, "He's not a problem. His people aren't going to be a problem. I'd like to coordinate with him directly about positioning." Haynes looked as though he had several thoughts about this that he was choosing not to say. Then he said, "Fine." Emily Carter woke up fully at 8:20. It wasn't a gradual thing. It wasn't the soft surfacing that Dana had seen in the night, the hovering near consciousness, the fractional awareness. One moment she was under, and the next moment her eyes opened, and they were clear, not adjusted, not orientating, but immediately sharp, with a kind of watchfulness that cut right through the clinical observation Dana had maintained all morning and made her feel briefly that she was the one being assessed. Emily scanned the room in a single sweep. She took in Dana. She took in the monitoring equipment. She took in the IV line in her arm and the compression cuffs on her legs and the blanket pulled up to her sternum, and she appeared to process all of this information in approximately 1 second. And then she said in a voice that was rough and low, but completely controlled, "How long have I been here?" "Since early this morning," Dana said, coming to the bedside. "Almost 7 hours. My name is Dana. I'm your nurse. You're at Desert Valley Medical Center. You're safe." Emily looked at her. "You called him," she said. "Raven." "I found the photograph and the note." Something moved through Emily's face, relief and grief, and something complicated that lived between them, something that looked like the expression of a person who had expected to not make it and is now confronting the reality of having made it and doesn't entirely know what to do with that. "He's here," Dana said. "He's been here since before 4. Emily closed her eyes briefly, one exhale, long and deliberate. When she opened them again, the watchfulness was still there, but something had shifted in the quality of it. It was still guarded, but it was guarded in a different direction, now turned outward rather than inward, looking at a threat rather than managing an internal landscape. "They're going to come," Emily said. "We know," Dana said. "No." Emily's hand came up and gripped Dana's wrist, not hard, not hurting, but with a precision that said, "This is important, stay with what I'm saying. You don't know how they operate. They don't come in loud. They don't send people who look like problems. They send people who look like help. They send people with clipboards and lanyards and the right vocabulary. They'll come in looking like they belong here, and they'll try to take me somewhere, and I will disappear." Dana covered Emily's hand with her own and held it. "I need you to tell me everything you know," she said. "Everything about Meridian, everything about what you found. We need to know what we're dealing with." Emily looked at her for a long moment. Dana watched her make a decision. "Get Raven," Emily said. He came in and he stood beside the bed and he looked at her, really looked at her, took in every detail of her face and her condition, the way you look at someone when you have been afraid they were gone, and they are not gone when the fear has not fully released yet because the danger hasn't fully passed. And he said very quietly, "Hey kid." Emily said, "You brought half the state, didn't you?" "Working on it," he said. Something close to a laugh moved through her face, but it was thin, and it cost her, and she let it go. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I thought I could handle it. I thought if I just kept my head down and waited until I had more." "Stop," he said, not harsh, definitive. "None of that. We're past that." She looked at him. He looked back. Something passed between them that Dana understood, without being able to name the specific communication of people who have a shared history that doesn't require explanation, who understand each other's silences because they've been in the same silences before. "Tell me what you found," he said. "All of it from the beginning." So she told them. She had started at Meridian Care Transport 14 months ago. The job was straightforward. She coordinated patient transfer logistics, which meant she managed the documentation flow between hospitals, nursing facilities, and the transport company. Patient intake forms, transfer authorizations, billing codes, the paperwork chain that followed a patient from one point of care to another. "It took me 3 months to notice," she said, "because the system was designed so that you'd have to be looking at multiple documents at once to see it. The discrepancy wasn't in any single record. It was in the gaps between records." The pattern as she laid it out was methodical and deliberate. Meridian was receiving payments for transporting patients, billing Medicare and Medicaid, and private insurance carriers for services rendered vehicles dispatched hours logged. The billing records were clean, but the receiving facilities, the nursing homes and rehabilitation centers, and long-term care facilities that were listed as the destination showed no record of many of these patients ever arriving. In the first month I noticed it, I thought it was a documentation error, Emily said. Happens all the time. A facility forgets to log an admission, or it goes into a different system, or there's a delay. So I started following up, quietly, just asking questions that looked like routine quality checks. She paused, her jaw tightened. Every time I found a gap and started pulling on it, the gap got filled. Not with real information, with documents that appeared after I started asking, backdated exactly what you'd need to close the question. They were watching what you were watching, Raven said. Yes, I just didn't know it yet. She looked at her own hand, the IV line taped to the back of it. There were 47 patients over 18 months that I could identify clearly. 47 people who, according to Meridian's records, were transported to facilities that have no record of them. 47 people who disappeared from the documentation chain and were never flagged because the billing got paid and the paperwork got filed and nobody was looking at the space in between. The room was very quiet. Who are they? Dana said. The patients. Who were they on him? Elderly. Almost all of them over 70. Most of them without close family, widowed, estranged, in a system that moves them from place to place without anyone advocating specifically for them. Some of them with significant assets, homes they owned, savings, life insurance. Emily looked at Raven and her voice was very steady and very flat in the way that voices are when the emotion beneath them has been compressed into something very small and very dense. I haven't been able to prove what happened to them, but I know what the documents say happened to them, and I know the documents are lies. Raven was very still. Where's the evidence you copied? 3 places, Emily said. Copies on an encrypted drive I gave to a woman named Clara Reyes. She's a retired school teacher. She was my neighbor. She has no connection to any of this. I trusted her because she's the kind of person who dots every I and doesn't throw anything away. Copies sent to a P.O. box under a name that nobody connects to me, and copies uploaded to a cloud account that I created from a library terminal. She paused. But I have to tell you something about that last one. The night before I ended up here, I think they got into that account. I tried to access it and the password had been changed. What about Clara? Raven said. I don't know. I haven't talked to her in 3 weeks. I've been moving, not staying anywhere more than 2 nights. Give me her address. Emily gave it to him. He took out his phone and sent a text message in 3 words. Dana couldn't see what it said, but she saw the send, and she saw Raven look up from the phone with his jaw set in a particular way. Someone's going to check on Clara, he said. Right now. Emily nodded. She closed her eyes for a moment, and Dana thought she might be going back under. But when she opened them, they were clear, and there was something new in them, something that had arrived alongside the information she had just given up. Something like the particular lightness that comes when you have been carrying something alone for a very long time and have just for the first time handed part of it to someone else. I need to tell you about the man behind it, Emily said, because understanding what I found isn't enough. You have to understand who you're dealing with. Colton, Raven said. Emily looked at him. You already know the name. I've been doing my own research for 3 weeks, he said. Tell me what you know that I don't. Richard Colton. Emily told him was not simply a businessman who had stumbled into fraud. He was a man who had spent 25 years building a specific kind of infrastructure, a network of healthcare companies, transportation services, care facilities, and administrative systems that were on their surface legitimate and even admirable, and that were underneath designed from the beginning to exploit the most invisible segment of the population, the elderly, the isolated. The people who moved through the medical system without advocates, whose deaths attracted no scrutiny, whose assets could be transferred quietly and legally once the right paperwork was in place. He has a lawyer named Douglas Merritt, Emily said. Merritt handles the legal structures. When a patient comes through the system, through Meridian, specifically, Merritt's firm identifies whether they have assets worth pursuing. If they do, the patient gets routed to a specific set of facilities. Facilities that Colton has ownership stakes in. Once they're in those facilities, there are people who specialize in getting power of attorney transferred, guardianship documents, Estate modifications. She paused. Some of these people are still alive in those facilities being cared for, if you can call it that, and their assets are being systematically liquidated around them while they don't have the cognitive capacity to understand what's happening. And some of them, she stopped. Emily, Raven said. Some of them never made it to the facilities, she said. That's what the 47 gaps are. That's what I can't prove, but what I know. The silence that followed was of a specific and terrible quality. Dinah was aware of her own heartbeat. She was aware of the monitors, the steady beeping. She was aware that she was standing in a room at a hospital where she had worked for 11 years and hearing something that reframed everything she thought she understood about where vulnerability could find you and what shape the thing that exploited it could take. He called here, Dana said, or someone connected to him called here, within 40 minutes. Merritt, Emily said immediately. Merritt has people everywhere. He has contacts in hospital admin systems and insurance billing networks. When I showed up at an emergency room, it would have flagged somewhere in his system. Some alert tied to my name or my description or my... She stopped. Then wait. Something changed in her face. Her eyes went somewhere internal, tracking backward through something. My transport card, she said. When they picked me up, the paramedics, did they find a transport card on me? Small blue looks like a health insurance card. Dana thought back. She thought about the inventory of Emily's belongings. I don't think so. There was a canvas bag, a receipt, some cash, the photograph. I don't remember a card. Then someone took it before the paramedics arrived, Emily said. That card has my biometric data on it. It was a Meridian employee card. If someone stripped it from me before I was brought in, they would have used it to trigger exactly the kind of alert I'm describing. She looked at Raven. I didn't collapse out front by accident. I made it out front on purpose. I was trying to get inside. Someone was following me, and I ran out of time. The room was very quiet. Who was following you? Raven said. I don't know his name. I've seen him 3 times in the past month. He's not subtle. I think he wasn't meant to be. I think he was supposed to be visible, to keep me scared and contained. She looked at her hands. It worked for a while. Raven's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His face changed. What? Dana said. Clara Reyes is fine, he said. She's at home. She has the drive. Something shifted in his voice. She's been waiting for someone to call, Bondon. She says Emily told her that if someone called asking about a package, she should say yes to everything they asked. Emily made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a gum and was something more honest than either. Good, she said. Good, she kept it. She kept it, Raven confirmed. He looked at Emily steadily. We're going to get it, and we're going to know exactly what's on it, and then we're going to figure out what to do with it. Colton has lawyers and political connections and people inside every system that matters, Emily said. You can't just walk into a police station and hand them an encrypted drive. I know, Raven said. I'm not planning to walk into a police station. He paused. We have people who know how to handle information. Tyler Ghost, he's been working on the digital side of this since before dawn. And I've already put out some questions through channels that are harder to monitor than anything Colton's people have access to. Another pause. But first, we have to make sure you're here long enough for any of that to matter. The knock at the door came at 9:47. It was not threatening. It was a perfectly ordinary knock, polite, measured 2 soft raps, the knock of a professional, arriving at a professional environment with professional expectations. Dana answered it. The man in the doorway was 40-something, clean-shaven, wearing a dark suit with a hospital visitor badge clipped to the lapel. He carried a leather portfolio, and he wore the particular expression of someone who has been trained to project calm authority in environments where authority is contested. Behind him, a step back, was a younger man similarly dressed, similarly composed. Good morning, the man said. He looked at Dana first, then passed her at the room. His gaze moved over Emily and the bed, over Raven and the chair beside her, and something registered and then was smoothed over so quickly that if Dana hadn't been watching for exactly this, she would have missed it entirely. I'm Alan Forster from Barton and Merritt Legal. I'm here on behalf of the Carter family in connection with a patient and Emily Carter. I believe she was admitted overnight. Dana felt the air in the room change. She felt Raven go still in the chair. The particular stillness of a man who has just received confirmation of something He already knew and is now deciding how to respond to it. I'm going to need to see your identification, Dana said pleasantly, and your bar credentials. A flicker. Almost nothing. But there. Of course. He opened the portfolio and produced a card. Dana took it and looked at it and handed it back. Barton and Merritt Legal. The name Merritt landed in her chest with the weight Emily had given it 20 minutes ago. What family? Emily said from the bed. The lawyer looked at her. His composure was excellent. Ms. Carter, I'm glad to see you're awake. The family has been very concerned. What family? Emily said again in the same tone, not louder, not more aggressive, just completely immovable. A question that had its arms crossed and intended to stay until it got an actual answer. Your mother's side, the lawyer said smoothly. Your Aunt Patricia. I don't have an aunt named Patricia, Emily said. I don't have an aunt at all. My mother was an only child. My father was an only child. I have no living family. She paused one beat too. So I'll ask you one more time. What family? The lawyer's composure held. It was very good composure. I understand this must be a confusing time. My name is Jackson Cole. Raven had stood up from the chair. He stood to his full height and his voice was absolutely even. I'm Emily's legal emergency contact. I was the first person this hospital notified. I have documentation. He looked at the lawyer with an expression that conveyed nothing threatening and nothing yielding and absolutely nothing that left room for misinterpretation. She has no family. You know she has no family. And Barton and Merritt, legal knows she has no family because your firm has had access to her Meridian employee records, which include next of kin information that lists me and only me. A silence. So, Raven continued, you can tell me right now who sent you here and what you actually want. Or you can go back to Douglas Merritt and tell him that the people protecting Emily Carter already know who he is and what he does and that we are not confused about what this visit represents. The lawyer looked at him. Something very careful happened behind the man's eyes. A recalculation. I think there may be some misunderstanding, he began. There's no misunderstanding, Raven said. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, Dana said from the doorway. The doorway. She said it with 11 years of professional authority, the voice she used when a situation required absolute clarity and zero ambiguity. If you'd like to pursue any further contact with this patient, you'll need to go through our patient advocate's office, and they will require documentation of your standing, and that documentation will be reviewed by our legal department. There's a number at the front desk. Another pause. The lawyer looked at Emily. Emily looked back at him with an expression that was entirely unafraid, that had perhaps been afraid for months, but was not afraid right now in this room with this person. Have a good morning, Dana said. The lawyer left. The younger man left with him. Dana closed the door and turned and looked at Raven, and Raven was already on his phone. Ghost, he said when it picked up. Get me everything on a lawyer named Douglas Merritt Barton and Merritt Legal. Everything that exists. I don't care if it takes all day. A pause. He just sent someone to the hospital to try to assess the situation. We need to know what we're dealing with before his next move. Tyler Ghost Bennett was 31 years old and had the rangy, slightly distracted quality of someone whose mind was almost always somewhere else, somewhere in a system, somewhere in a data structure, somewhere in the invisible architecture of information that most people interacted with constantly and understood not at all. He had been with the chapter for 6 years, brought in not for the physical dimensions of club membership, but for a set of skills that had become increasingly essential in a world where the most important battles were fought not with force, but with information. He had been working since 4 a.m. He was currently sitting in a gas station parking lot a mile from the hospital with 3 laptops open and a cold coffee he kept forgetting to drink. He called Raven back at 10:22. Okay, he said, and his voice had the slightly breathless quality of someone who has been moving fast through a large space and has just arrived at something specific. I've got preliminary on Merritt. He's been with Barton and Merritt for 16 years, made partner 12 years ago. Clean bar record, no public disciplinary actions. But his firm's corporate client list includes, and I want you to hear this carefully, 4 separate healthcare companies, all of which have overlapping board membership with Meridian Care Transport's parent company, which is a holding company called Vantage Health Solutions, which is owned through a series of LLC structures by Colton, Raven said. Richard Colton, yes, but here's the thing. Ghost's voice dropped a register, became more precise. Colton's not at the top of this. I've been pulling the ownership chains on these LLCs, and they don't all terminate with him. 3 of them pass through him and then go somewhere else, somewhere I haven't been able to identify yet because the structures get very complicated very fast at that level. Colton is a significant player, but I don't think he built this. I think he runs a piece of it. Raven was quiet, which means Ghost continued, that even if we bring down Colton, even if everything Emily has is enough to take him apart completely, there's infrastructure above him that survives. How long to follow the chains? Depends on how much of the structure is hidden in jurisdictions I don't have good access to. Could be days. Could be longer. A pause. But Raven, I also found something else. Something that's more immediately relevant. Tell me, Meridian Care Transport's IT systems have an administrative access account that's been logging into the patient intake database from an external IP address for the past 8 months. Regularly, weekly, sometimes more often. The IP routes through a VP, but I've got a partial trace on the exit node, and it's local. Whoever has that access is close, and they've been using it to monitor patient intake at 6 hospitals in the Phoenix metro area. Raven understood immediately. That's how they knew she was here. Within minutes of her intake being logged, Ghost confirmed. The account is flagged as an IT maintenance account in Meridian's system, but the access patterns don't match maintenance activity at all. Someone inside Meridian or someone with Meridian credentials is running surveillance on hospital admissions. Can you find out who has those credentials? Working on it? A brief pause. There's one more thing. The account didn't just pull Emily's intake record. It pulled 3 other records from Desert Valley last night. 3 other patients admitted in the same window. The weight of this settled into the call like something falling slowly. So it's not just Emily they're watching, Raven said. It's never been just Emily, Ghost said. That's the point. Emily found the evidence. But the operation is ongoing. Whatever is happening to those 47 people she identified, it didn't stop when she started looking. It's still happening. Marcus Doc Walker arrived at the hospital at 10:45. He was 58, built like someone who had spent his 20s in hard physical service, and his subsequent decades respecting what that had cost him, with a gray-streaked beard and hands that moved with the particular deliberate competence of someone trained to work under pressure in conditions that did not forgive mistakes. He had been a combat medic for 8 years. He had been a chapter member for 14. He came directly to Raven, and they stood in the corridor, and Raven told him everything in 4 minutes. What do you need from me? You see me, Doc said. The people in that parking lot need a focal point, Raven said. They need someone coordinating them who understands that this isn't a show of force, it's a perimeter. I need them positioned so that anybody approaching this building with bad intent has to get through a lot of people who are paying very close attention before they get near that room. And the hospital administration, Gerald Park, their security chief, is cooperative. Brief him. He's going to coordinate with you on positioning. I want our people visible, but not obstructive. We're not blocking the entrance. We're not interfering with patients or staff. We're here and we're present and we're not going anywhere. And anybody who's watching this from outside needs to understand that the calculus has changed. Doc nodded. How many coming? Last count I got from Preacher was 240, Raven said. He's still an hour out with the Tucson contingent. Flagstaff boys are close. He paused. By noon, we'll have most of them. Doc looked at him steadily. This Colton, he's going to respond to this. Men like that always respond when they feel cornered. I know, Raven said. That's what I'm counting on. At 11:30, Preacher Dawson called. Preacher was the chapter's road captain, a 60-year-old man with a preacher's voice deep and carrying the kind of voice that filled a space without effort, and a road captain's instincts, which were in their essence, the instincts of a man responsible for the safe passage of a group through difficult terrain. He had been on the highway since before dawn. We're 6 minutes out, he said. 93 riders with me, another 40 or so coming behind us from the East chapter. Preacher, Raven said, before you come in, tell me you're hanging the word. It was a thing Raven had done for years. A check, a brief statement of what the group understood about what they were doing and why, spoken out loud so that it was clear and shared and could not be misremembered later. A pause on the line, then preacher's voice, measured and deliberate. We are here for a woman who has nobody. We are not here to threaten or intimidate. We are not here to make the hospital's job harder or to create problems for people who had nothing to do with what happened to her. We are here because she needed people to show up, so we showed up. Raven was quiet for a moment. Come in, he said, awed. Emily heard them arrive. She couldn't see the parking lot from her room, but she could hear faintly through the window, through the sounds of the hospital, the engines. One and then another, and then the sustained building rumble of many engines coming together. A sound that should have been intimidating and wasn't, or rather was intimidating in a way that felt from inside her room like something wrapping around the building from the outside. Something that had weight and presence and was oriented inward, toward her like a wall that faced the right direction. She didn't say anything for a moment. She listened. Then she said, how many? Dana had just come back in with a medication update. She looked at Emily and said, a lot. How many is a lot? Dana considered her answer. The last count from parking was 278. Emily was quiet. She looked at the ceiling. Dana watched her face move through something complicated, something that was not simply emotion, or not simply one emotion, but a layering of several things simultaneously, disbelief and gratitude, and something that looked very much like grief, the specific grief of someone who has been alone for a long time and is only now in this moment registering how long and how completely, because the contrast has arrived. All of them came for me, she said. It wasn't a question, but Dana answered it like one anyway. All of them, she said. Yes, Emily pressed her lips together. One moment. Two. Then she said with the careful control of someone managing something too large for the available space. Does Raven know? Did he ever tell you what I did? He told me, Dana said. He told me you sat with him on the side of a highway for 2 hours. It wasn't a big thing, Emily said. It wasn't. I didn't even know who he was. I just saw someone hurt, and I couldn't drive away from that. That's all it was. She paused. I didn't know it would become this. I don't think kindness usually comes with a preview of where it ends up, Dana said. Emily looked at her, then quietly. 300 people. Getting close to 300, Dana said. Emily looked at the ceiling again. She blinked several times in quick succession. Then she said very quietly the words precise and deliberate and meaning exactly what they said. I didn't think anyone would come. At 12:14, Tyler Ghost called Raven back. I've got the credentials traced, he said, and his voice was careful in the particular way it got when something had landed that he was still processing. The external access account, the one monitoring hospital admissions through Meridian's system. I've got a name attached to the account creation. The account was set up 14 months ago, and it was set up using a workstation inside Desert Valley Medical Center. Raven went very still. Someone inside the hospital, he said. Someone who was inside the hospital 14 months ago. Ghost corrected carefully. Could be a current employee. Could be someone who had access at that time and doesn't anymore. Could be someone using credentials they shouldn't have. A pause. But yes, the breach didn't come from outside. The connection between Colton's network and this hospital was established from inside this building. Raven stood in the corridor outside Emily's room and looked at the door and thought about what this meant in practical terms, about everything that had happened since Emily was brought in, about the transfer call that had come 40 minutes after her arrival, about the lawyer who had shown up with a story about family that didn't exist, about who else in this building might know Emily was here, about who else in this building might have made a call. Can you identify a specific person? Raven said. Not yet, Ghost said. But I can tell you that the account has been active as recently as this morning. Whoever has those credentials, they accessed the system this morning. From somewhere that isn't their home and isn't an external VPN. He paused. They accessed it from inside this hospital. Raven turned and looked down the corridor. The nurses' station, the administrative offices, the supply rooms, the staff areas, the dozens of people moving through this building on a normal working day. People with badges and lanyards and the right vocabulary. People who looked exactly like they belonged here. Ghost, he said, I need you to find that person before they make another move. I'm already looking, Ghost said. Look faster, Raven said. He walked to the door of Emily's room and he pushed it open, and he went inside and he stood at the foot of the bed and looked at Emily Carter, alive, awake, still here, and he said very quietly, so only she could hear, "There's someone inside this hospital who's connected to Colton's network. We don't know who yet." Emily looked at him. Her expression didn't collapse. It didn't show fear in the way fear usually showed itself. It sharpened. "Then we better find out," she said, "before they find a reason to come back in here." Outside engines idled and cut off one by one as more riders arrived and took their positions. The parking lot was filling with people who had driven through the night in the early morning from places across the state, drawn by a single word sent through a network built on loyalty and kept in motion by something that had no official name, but that everyone in that lot understood, the understanding that when someone is alone and in danger, the question is not whether you go. The question is only how fast you can get there, and every single one of them was already there. Ghost called back at 12:51. Raven had stepped into the corridor when the phone buzzed, pulling the door to Emily's room almost closed behind him, leaving it cracked just enough that he could hear if anything changed inside. Dana was at the nurse's station 12 feet away. She had stopped pretending to do charting and was watching him with the focused attention of someone who had accepted hours ago that she was part of this now and was not going to pretend otherwise. "Talk to me," Raven said. "I've got a name," Ghost said. "I want you to stay calm when I give it to you because we need to think about this carefully before we do anything." "Give me the name." A pause that lasted exactly long enough for Ghost to decide he trusted Raven's version of calm. "The workstation that established the Meridian Access account 14 months ago is registered to an employee of Desert Valley Medical Center's Billing and Records Department. Her name is Patricia Holt. She's been with the hospital for 9 years. She's currently on shift." Raven was quiet for 3 full seconds. "Patricia Holt," he said. "She's in the administrative wing," Ghost said. "Third floor." I cross-referenced her employee badge activity with the access log timestamps, and they match 11 separate instances over the past 14 months, including, he paused, this morning at 8:07 a.m. She badged into the records systems room on the 3rd floor at 8:07. The Meridian External Access account pinged the Desert Valley Intake Database at 8:09. 2 minutes, Raven said. 2 minutes, Ghost confirmed. She went in, she pulled up the access, she checked Emily's status, and she left. 8 minutes total. She walked out of that room at 8:15 and went back to her regular desk. Raven turned and looked at the nurse's station. Dana was watching him, and she read something in his face because she sat up straighter, that particular straightening of a person who has been waiting for the next hard thing and feels it arriving. "Does anyone else know?" Raven said into the phone. "Not from me," Ghost said. "I thought you should hear it first, but Raven, I need you to understand something. Patricia Holt is not the person running this. She's a conduit. She has a single access account that she uses for a specific task on a recurring schedule. She's not an architect. She's a piece of the architecture." "That doesn't matter right now," Raven said. "What matters is that she sent someone information this morning, and that information led to a lawyer showing up at that door 2 hours later." "I know," Ghost said. "That's why I called fast. Can you freeze the access account?" A pause. "Technically, yes. I can push a credential invalidation through Meridian's system backend. It'll look like an administrative lockout routine stuff. She'll think it's a system glitch." "Do it." "Already did it," Ghost said, 30 seconds ago. Raven exhaled slowly. "Good. Keep watching her badge activity. If she tries to access anything related to Emily's records or the intake system through any other route, I need to know immediately." "Understood." Ghost paused one more time. "There's something else. The lawyer who came this morning, Forrester. I ran his bar credentials against the visitor log at Desert Valley from the past 6 months. He's been here before, twice, both times corresponding with patient admissions that match the profile of Colton's target's elderly, isolated, significant assets." Raven pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead. "He's been running the same play at this hospital before. At least twice that I can verify," Ghost said. "And both of those patients, I checked their discharge records. Both transferred out within 72 hours of Forster's visit. Both transferred to facilities in Colton's network. Where are they now?" A long pause, the kind of pause that carried its own answer. "I'm still looking." "Osito," Ghost said quietly. Duh. Raven walked to the nurse's station and he stood in front of Dana and he said without preamble, I need you to tell me about a woman named Patricia Holt. She works in your billing and records department, third floor. She's been here 9 years. Dana's expression didn't change immediately. Then it did not dramatically, just a compression, a narrowing of something that had been more open. I know who Patricia is, she said carefully. How well do you know her? Well enough to say good morning to. She's been here longer than I have. She's quiet, professional. I've never had a problem with her. She paused. Why don't they? Raven told her, he told her precisely and without softening because Dana had demonstrated from the moment she made that phone call at 1:37 in the morning that she was someone who operated better with the truth than with a managed version of it, and because there wasn't time for managed versions of anything anymore. Dana listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, that access account she used, if it's connected to Meridian and Meridian's records were part of what Emily was investigating, then Patricia may have access to patient information she should never have been able to pull. She does, Raven said, and she's been pulling it for 14 months, including this morning. Dana looked at the corridor, then back at Raven. I have to tell Robert Haynes. I know. And Gerald Park. I know. But Dana, he waited until she looked at him directly. If Patricia Holt realizes, we know she will contact someone immediately. And whatever response Colton's people were already planning will accelerate. I need enough time for my people to get some things in place before that happens. How much time? 2 hours. Dana considered this. It was a significant ask. It meant sitting with information that her professional obligations arguably required her to act on immediately and choosing not to act for a defined window. And it meant being accountable for that choice. She had been making choices like this since 1:37 in the morning. She was apparently not done making them. 2 hours, she said, and then I'm telling Haynes. 2 hours is all I need, said. Raven went back into Emily's room and pulled a chair to the bed and sat down and looked at her and said, there's someone in this hospital who's been feeding information to Colton's network. Emily looked at him. She had been sitting up for the past hour, a pillow behind her. Her color improving incrementally in the way that bodies recover when they have been given fluids and rest in safety, not fully, not quickly, but visibly, cell by cell. She looked like herself, which was the most important thing. Tell me, she said. He told her. She listened with her eyes focused on a fixed point on the wall opposite the particular listening of someone assembling information in real time, fitting what she was hearing into a framework she had been building for months. Patricia Holt, she said when he finished. I don't know that name. You wouldn't, he said. She's not in Colton's visible operation. She's infrastructure, someone who had access to something useful and was recruited for that specific thing. How long has she been doing it? 14 months, Emily absorbed this. 14 months. She had started at Meridian 14 months ago. They put her in place before I even started noticing anything, she said. Which means this wasn't a response to me finding things. The surveillance infrastructure was already there. They were already monitoring admissions. Looking for targets, Raven said. Always looking for targets, Emily said. She looked at him. Raven, this is bigger than what I documented. I found 47 names, but if they've been running active surveillance on hospital admissions across the metro area for over a year, I know, he said, the number isn't 47. I know. A silence settled between them, the specific silence of two people looking at the same large and terrible thing from the same angle. What's the plan? Emily said. Ghost is working on the digital evidence trail. He's already locked Patricia Holt's access account. She'll think it's a system error. Doc is coordinating our people outside. And I've got to call into someone who might be able to help us move the evidence through the right channels that Colton can't easily get to. He paused. But first I need you to walk me through the evidence on that drive. Everything Clara has. I need to know exactly what's there so we know what it proves and what it doesn't. Emily nodded. She shifted slightly in the bed, wincing once, suppressing it fast, and then she straightened and began to talk. She talked for 40 minutes straight. Raven listened and asked precise questions, and she answered them. And somewhere in the fourth or fifth exchange, it became less like a briefing and more like what it actually was, which was two people who had known each other for 7 years and trusted each other in the specific way that people trust each other, when that trust has been built not through similarity, but through shared evidence, through demonstrated reliability under conditions that tested it. Emily Carter had been 23 years old when she sat down beside Raven's motorcycle on the shoulder of Highway 60 in a rainstorm and refused to leave. She had been driving home from a double shift, tired in the way that you are tired when you have been on your feet for 16 hours, and your body has started having a quiet negotiation with your mind about what it will and won't do next. She had seen the bike on the shoulder and the man beside it, and she had told herself she would check that help was coming and then she would keep going. She had called 911 and been told 40 minutes estimated arrival. She had looked at the man on the ground bleeding from a head wound, semi-conscious, clearly hypothermic in the rain, that was coming down hard, and she had made a decision that she had not fully interrogated at the time because there was no time to interrogate it. She had simply been unable to drive away. So she had stayed. She had kept him talking when he was conscious, and she had stayed close when he wasn't, and she had told the paramedics when they finally arrived exactly what had happened and what she had observed, all of it clinically precise, all of it useful. And then she had gone home and she had slept for 11 hours and she had not told anyone about it because it had not seemed like a story yet. It had seemed like a Tuesday. Raven had found her 3 weeks later. He had tracked her through the 911 call and the paramedic report, and he had come to her workplace. She had been managing the front desk at a small medical office at the time, and he had walked in and she had looked at him and recognized him, and he had said simply, "I wanted to thank you in person." They had talked for 2 hours. They had become over the 7 years since something that fit no easy category. Not friends exactly, though it was that, not family, though it held some of what that word meant, something specific to themselves, built of gratitude and respect, and a handful of conversations a year, and the particular warmth of knowing that somewhere in the world there was a person who would pick up the phone. She had called him when she started to understand what Meridian was. Of all the people she could have called, she had called him. And now he was here. And outside the window, the sound of 300 people who had come because he asked them to fill the air like something that had weather to it, like the particular sustained presence of a force that had decided to hold its ground. The drive has 3 categories of evidence, Emily said, pulling herself back to the immediate. The first is the transfer documentation, the 47 cases where I can show the billing record, the transfer authorization, and the absence of any receiving facility documentation. That's the core. That's what proves the fraud at the billing level. Is that enough to charge Colton? Maybe. Probably not directly. He'll have layers between himself and any specific fraudulent document. But it's enough to trigger a serious federal investigation, which opens doors. She paused. The second category is the internal communication records I was able to access before they locked me out of the system. Email chains between Meridian's operations director, a man named Gary Stills, and what looks like a property management company that I later identified as another Colton LLC. The emails discuss patient, quote-unquote, case management in language that's clearly coded. But once you understand the system, the meaning is not ambiguous. What's the third category? Emily was quiet for a moment. Before I left Meridian, I had access to a shared drive that the operations team used for internal scheduling. The scheduling documents include patient routing codes that I decoded over about 2 months of work. The codes differentiate between patients who are routed to legitimate care and patients who are routed through what the documents call secondary processing. She looked at Raven steadily. Secondary processing is where the 47 names come from. It's the designation applied to patients who were never going to arrive at the listed facility. The word landed in the room with everything it implied. "Can a prosecutor work with that?" Raven said. His voice was controlled, absolutely controlled. "With the right prosecutor," Emily said. "Someone who's not connected to Colton's political network. Someone who doesn't owe him anything." She paused. That's the hard part, because Colton's been very strategic about where his money goes in this state. At 1:33 in the afternoon, Doc Walker knocked on the door. He came in with the compact efficiency he brought to everything, closing the door behind him and standing just inside it, his presence filling the room in the way of someone who occupies space with intention. He looked at Emily. First, the assessment was professional, measuring her current condition against what Raven had described to him, arriving at his own evaluation, and then at Raven. "We've got a problem outside," he said. "Tell me." "A news van arrived 40 minutes ago. Channel 7. They've got a reporter and a camera crew, and they're doing live shots from the parking lot entrance. They're describing the situation as a, quote, biker gang standoff at a local hospital. His voice was flat and precise. I've already talked to our people, and nobody has engaged with them, and nobody is going to. But the coverage is going out, and once it goes out, Colton sees it, Emily said. Doc looked at her. Yes, ma'am. And so does everyone in the state who's been watching for a reason to either condemn this, or he paused, or think about it differently. How are our people handling it? Raven said. Exactly how you told them to. Standing their ground, staying quiet, not engaging. Gerald Park has a security team at the entrance, and they're being professional. But the optics are... Doc paused again, searching for the word complicated. Camera sees 300 bikers in leather and patches standing outside a hospital. That's a specific story. Doesn't matter what the real story is. We need to change what the camera sees, Emily said. Both men looked at her. She was sitting up fully now. The pillow adjusted behind her, and there was something in her expression that was different from anything Dana had seen all morning. Something resolved and clear. And if Dana was reading it correctly, slightly dangerous in a very quiet way. Not by moving them, Emily continued, not by telling them to leave or hide the vests or pretend to be something they're not, by giving the camera something more accurate to point at. She looked at Raven. Is there anyone out there who can talk who's good at it? Raven thought for exactly 2 seconds. Preacher, he said. Preacher can talk. Then get Preacher in front of that camera, Emily said, and tell him to tell the truth, not the organized version, not the official version. The actual truth, why everyone came, what Emily Carter did 7 years ago, what this is actually about. Let the camera have the real story instead of the story it's trying to tell itself. Doc looked at Raven. Raven looked at the door, then back at Emily. You sure? I've been hiding for 3 months, Emily said quietly. I am absolutely sure. Get the term. Preacher Dawson did not prepare remarks. He didn't need to. He had been a road captain for 14 years, and before that he had been a lot of things, some of which he talked about and some of which he didn't. And what all of it had given him was the ability to stand in front of a camera and a reporter with a microphone and say exactly what was true in exactly the way that made it land. The reporter, young Sharp, clearly trying to decide whether she was covering a threat or a story, came at him with the standard opening. Can you explain what's happening here? Why are hundreds of motorcycle club members gathered outside this hospital? Preacher looked at her camera and then at her, and he said, 7 years ago, a young woman named Emily Carter was driving home from a long shift, and she saw a man hurt on the side of the road. She didn't know him, didn't know what he was or what he'd done or who he rode with. She just knew he was hurt. So she sat with him in the rain for 2 hours until help came. She wouldn't leave him there alone. The reporter waited. That man was our brother, Preacher said. He's alive today because she didn't drive past. And right now, that same woman is in this hospital fighting for her life, and the people who put her here are going to try to finish what they started. So we came. That's all. We came because she stayed. The reporter was quiet for a moment. Then, who put her here? What happened to her? That's a question for the investigation that needs to happen, Preacher said. All I know is she found something she wasn't supposed to find, and it almost cost her everything. And the people who are supposed to ask those questions need to start asking them. Are you concerned about the police response to your presence here? Preacher almost smiled. We're not here to concern anybody. We're here to stand between a woman and the people who want to hurt her. You call that what you want. We call it showing up. The clip went live at 2:14 p.m. By 2:45, it had been shared 60,000 times. By 3 o'clock, the comment section was overwhelmingly one thing. People saying they had not expected to feel what they felt when they watched it. People saying they were crying in their cars. People saying they hadn't thought of bikers this way. People saying the woman at the center of this deserved justice. People saying the man on the screen was telling the truth in a way they hadn't heard in a long time. Ghost texted Raven a screenshot of the view count with a single word viral. Raven showed it to Emily. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, Colton is watching this too. Yes, Raven said. He's going to move faster now. Yes. Good, Emily said, and her voice was steady in a way that hadn't been there this morning. Let him move fast. Fast means sloppy. The call Raven had been waiting for came in at 3:22. The man who called identified himself only as Ford, and Raven knew who Ford was because he had put the word out through 3 separate channels early that morning, asking if anyone knew a detective working missing persons and elder fraud cases in the Phoenix Metro who was known to be clean, not connected, not obligated, not the kind of person who'd heard Colton's name and quietly decided not to look too hard. 2 of those channels had come back with the same name. Detective Marcus Ford, 11 years on the force, 3 commendations, 1 very public disagreement with his superiors, 18 months ago over what Ford called a deliberately under-resourced investigation into a series of complaints from nursing home facilities about unexplained patient transfers. The disagreement had been resolved in the way these things usually were, which was that Ford had been reassigned and the investigation had been quietly deprioritized. He had kept working it on his own time. "You're the man with the bikers," Ford said. Not a question. The clip had apparently reached him too. "I'm the man with the bikers," Raven confirmed. "I've been working a case for 18 months that I think intersects with what's happening at that hospital," Ford said. His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, the particular edge of a person who has been working alone towards something for a long time and is suddenly, unexpectedly, not alone anymore. "I've been trying to find someone with documentation I could move to the federal level. My own department has been resistant to pursuing this particular line of investigation." "Resistant because of Colton," Raven said. A pause. "I can't confirm names on an unsecured line." "That's confirmation enough," Raven said. "I have a witness, and I have documentation. What I need is someone who knows how to get that documentation to the right people without it going through any channel that Colton's people have access to." "I know someone at the FBI's Phoenix field office," Ford said. "An agent named Karen Solis. She's been building a parallel case from the federal angle: Medicare, fraud, elder, financial abuse, potential civil rights violations. She's been doing it quietly because she knows the same thing I know, which is that this operation has reached into a lot of places it shouldn't be able to reach. Can you get me a meeting with her today?" "I can try," but Ravender Ford used the name naturally as though he'd been using it for years. "I need to know what you've got. Is it enough? Because I've been close before and had the ground shift under me. I need to know before I make this call that what you have is real and it's documented and it doesn't have a hole in it big enough to drive a truck through." "Give me 1 hour," Raven said. "I'll call you back and tell you exactly what we have." Damn. He spent that hour with Emily. They went through everything on the drive, or rather Emily went through it, and Raven listened and asked the questions. A prosecutor would ask the questions. A defense attorney would ask the questions. A skeptical federal agent would ask, and Emily answered each one with precision, and occasionally with a certainty that surprised him, and occasionally with an honesty about where the gaps were that he respected more than any overconfidence would have. There were 3 solid gaps. 2 of them were bridgeable with additional digital work that Ghost could potentially close. One of them was a genuine hole, a period of 3 weeks in the middle of the document trail where Emily had been locked out of access and the chain was not unbroken. "How serious is that gap?" Raven asked. "It depends on what else corroborates it," Emily said. "If Ford's case has independent documentation of what was happening in those 3 weeks, the gap in mind becomes less significant. They'd be establishing the same facts from different directions. And if he doesn't, then a good defense attorney argues the gap is exculpatory and tries to create reasonable doubt on the most serious charges." She paused. "But here's the thing, even if Colton beats the most serious charges, what the documentation proves at minimum is Medicare fraud at a scale that carries federal sentencing. And once the federal investigation opens, more comes out. It always does." Raven was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need to ask you something." "Ask." "When this goes public, and it's going to go public, it's already going public, your name is attached to it. Your face is going to be on this. People are going to want your story, and Colton's lawyers are going to try to make the story about you instead of about what you found." He looked at her steadily. "Are you ready for that?" Emily looked at her hands. The IV was still there, the tape still securing the line, the proof of where she was and what it had cost to get here. She looked at it for a moment, and then she looked up. "I've been hiding for 3 months," she said. "I've been scared, and I have been alone, and I've been running. And I'm still here. They did their worst, and I'm still here." Her voice was quiet, but it was iron quiet, the quiet of something that had been tested and had held. Yes, she said. I'm ready. Gerald Park came to find Raven at 4:05. His expression was the expression of someone carrying specific information that has a specific weight to it, and he got directly to the point because he was the kind of man who got directly to the point. I need you to know something that just came to my attention, he said. I've been reviewing badge activity logs for the past 24 hours based on what you told me about the records room access. He paused. Patricia Holt left the building at 3:47 p.m. Left, Raven said, meaning she's gone. She badged out, said to the desk clerk she had a family emergency. Park's voice was careful. I checked her schedule. She's not supposed to be off until 6. And her access to the record system was flagged as locked out. She tried to access it twice this afternoon and was denied. At 3:42, she tried a third time, and then 5 minutes later, she badged out. Raven understood the sequence immediately. She had found the lockout. She had understood what it meant, and she had left. Is someone following her? Raven said. I don't have authority to follow an employee who's left the building, Park said carefully. She hasn't done anything I can document as a violation yet. Accessing a system she had credentials for isn't something I can easily prosecute. He paused. But I can tell you that if someone wanted to follow her and see where she goes, that would be very useful information. I know someone, Raven said. He made one call. 40 seconds later, Preacher, who had just completed what would become a very widely watched on-camera statement, and who was standing in the parking lot with nothing more pressing to do for the next few hours, was in his truck following Patricia Holt's gray Honda Civic at a respectful distance through the streets of Phoenix. Doc Walker came in at 4:30 with 3 sandwiches and 2 bottles of water and set them on the table beside Emily's bed without asking whether she was hungry, because he had spent 30 years assessing people's needs without waiting to be told, and he had assessed that she had not eaten since before she collapsed, and that the body currently working to repair itself needed fuel. Emily looked at the sandwiches, then at Doc. You're the medic, she said. Former, he said. What's your read on me? He looked at her, the professional assessment again quick and thorough. You're better than you were this morning. You took some damage that's going to take time to heal properly. You need to stay put for at least another 48 hours and not do anything stupid. He paused. You're not going to stay put for 48 hours, are you? I'll stay put for tonight, Emily said. After that, it depends on what happens. Fair enough, Doc said. He pulled the second chair in the room to the other side of the bed and sat in it and unwrapped his own sandwich. Raven tells me you worked for Meridian for 14 months. And before that, medical records coordination at a clinic. Before that, 2 years in hospital billing. I've been in healthcare administration in one form or another since I was 21. She picked up one of the sandwiches. I know these systems. I know where the gaps are because I worked in the gaps. I know how patient data moves and how it doesn't move and where it goes when it shouldn't go anywhere. She paused. That's how I found it. Not because I'm particularly clever. Because I've spent 6 years learning a system that most people never look closely enough at to understand. And someone like Colton built a scheme that depended on nobody looking closely, Doc said. Exactly. He built it to be invisible to people who are overworked and understaffed and not looking for fraud. They're looking for billing errors. He built it to be invisible to regulators who are checking boxes, not following chains. He built it to be invisible to families who aren't closely engaged with an elderly parent's care. She looked at the sandwich in her hands without eating it. He built it to exploit invisibility. The invisible people, the elderly ones, the isolated ones, the ones moving through a system that treats them as units rather than human beings, and the invisible gaps in that system where something can fall through and nobody notices. But you notice, Doc said? I noticed because I could not notice, Emily said. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. She finally took a bite of the sandwich. After a moment, she said, how many of your people have been out there all day? Getting close to 350 now, Doc said. A few more still coming in from the east. Do they know why they're there? The ones who came from far away who don't know Raven personally, do they know the story? Word travels through the club, Doc said. People know enough. They know a woman is in trouble and Raven called. For most of them, that's enough. He paused. For some of them, Preacher's clip went through the chain and now they know more. but the ones who just drove 3 hours because someone they trust called they came on faith. Emily was quiet for a moment. That's extraordinary, she said. Yes, ma'am, Doc said simply. It is. Asha. At 4:58, Ghost called with something new, and Raven took the call in the corridor and came back into the room 2 minutes later, and his face told both of them before he spoke that whatever he had just heard had changed something. Ghost found the rest of the ownership chain, he said. He looked at Emily. The LLCs above Colton, the ones he couldn't trace initially. He found them. And Emily said, Colton is one of 3 regional operators, Raven said. The scheme isn't specific to Arizona. There are parallel operations in Nevada and New Mexico. All 3 feed up into a single holding structure that's registered offshore. He paused. Ghost estimates based on the billing volumes he's been able to pull that the operation has taken in somewhere north of $200 million over the past 6 years. The number sat in the room like something with mass to it. 200 million, Emily said. Conservative estimate, Raven said. Could be significantly more. Emily pressed her eyes closed for a moment. When she opened them, they were very clear and very direct. 47 names, she said. I found 47 names. What's the real number? Ghost thinks hundreds, Raven said. Across 3 states, 6 years. He's still counting. None of them said anything for a moment. Then Emily said, we have to get this to Agent Solis today. Not tomorrow. Today. Because if Colton is spooked and he is spooked, he sent a lawyer here this morning. Patricia Holt ran this afternoon. If he starts moving assets or destroying documentation, we lose things we can't get back. Ford is setting up the meeting, Raven said. He said he'd have an answer by 5. Make sure he understands the timeline, Emily said. Make sure he understands that every hour we wait is an hour Colton is making decisions. He understands, Raven said. And Raven. She looked at him with the particular look she had, direct, unsparing, and underneath it something that had been there for 7 years, since a rainy highway, and 2 hours of keeping each other company in difficult circumstances. When you talk to Ford, when you talk to Solis, when you talk to whoever needs to be talked to, I need you to tell them about the 47 names, not about the fraud, not about the money. Tell them about the people. Tell them those 47 people are someone's parents and someone's grandparents, and they went into a system that was supposed to care for them, and they didn't come out the other side of it. And somebody needs to say that out loud in a room that has the authority to do something about it. Raven looked at her for a moment. Then he said, I'll tell them. Ford called at 5:03. Solis can see us at 6:30, he said. Her office, but she needs something in writing before the meeting, not the full evidence package, just a summary of what you have and how it was obtained. Enough for her to decide whether to bring her supervisor. I'll have Ghost put together a preliminary summary, Raven said. Clean, organized, no gaps, papered over. Everything that's solid is solid. Everything that needs corroboration is labeled as needing corroboration. She'll respect that more than a perfect document, Ford said. She's been burned by perfect documents before. Good, we'll be there at 6:30. He paused. Ford, Emily Carter is going to need protection that doesn't rely on 300 bikers standing in a parking lot indefinitely. What can you do? A pause. I can get a patrol car on the hospital for tonight. I can make it look routine, but beyond tonight, that's going to depend on how the 6:30 meeting goes. Another pause. Bring the drive. The drive is not here, Raven said. The drive is with Clara Reyes. Then get the drive. Someone's already on it, Raven said. He had sent Ghost to Clara Reyes an hour ago. Clara Reyes had been waiting. She had, as Emily described, dotted every I and had not thrown anything away. And she had answered the door when Ghost knocked. And she had said, I've been waiting for over a month. What took you so long? And she had handed over the drive in a Ziploc bag, along with a handwritten inventory of everything she had witnessed Emily give her. And when, in the exact words Emily had said at the time, because Clara Reyes was a retired school teacher, and retired school teachers documented things. At 5:45, Preacher called. She went to a house in Scottsdale, he said. Upscale neighborhood. She was inside for 22 minutes, and then she came out and drove home. I got the address of the house. A pause. I ran the address. Another pause. Raven, The house is registered to a property holding company. I looked up the holding company. His voice dropped. It's one of Colton's LLCs. The circle was complete. Patricia Holt had not simply run, she had reported. She had gone directly to a property connected to Colton's network, and she had spent 22 minutes inside, and then she had gone home, which meant someone now knew that the access account was locked, that the hospital was aware of the breach, and that whatever timeline Colton had been working on had just compressed dramatically. Raven called Ford back. The timeline moved up, he said, and told him about Preacher's surveillance in 30 seconds flat. Ford was quiet for 3 seconds. I'm calling Solis now. I'm going to buy Matt to see if we can move the meeting to 6. Move it, Raven said. He ended the call and went back into Emily's room and looked at her, and she read his face the way she had been reading it for 7 years. It's happening, she said. It's happening, he confirmed. Are you ready? She looked at him across the room. This woman who had been alone and afraid for 3 months and had nearly died getting herself to help, and who was now sitting in a hospital bed with an IV in her arm and 300 people standing outside her window, something that she had not been in a long time. She was ready. Go, she said. Go do what needs to be done. I'm not going anywhere. He stood up. He crossed to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back at her one more time the way you look at someone when you need to hold the image of them being an all right before you walk out into whatever comes next. Dana's here, he said. Doc's here. Nobody gets through that door who isn't supposed to. I know, Emily said. 300 people outside that window, he said. I know, she said again. He nodded once and then he went. And Emily Carter sat alone in her room and listened to the sound of the engines outside. Still there steady, 100 and more of them patient and immovable. And she thought about a rainy night 7 years ago when she had made a decision that had seemed at the time like a very small thing. It had not been a small thing. She understood that now completely in a way she had not understood before today. She reached for the third sandwich that Doc had left on the table. She unwrapped it. She ate it carefully, methodically, the way you eat when you are giving your body what it needs because you are going to need it, because the work is not done, and you are not done, and you are going to be standing when this is over. She was going to make sure of it. The meeting with Agent Karen Solis started at 6:03. She had moved it up from 6:30 herself, which told Raven something before she said a single word. She was a compact woman in her early 40s with dark hair pulled back and eyes that moved quickly and cataloged everything they landed on the eyes of someone who had been trained to assess environments and had been doing it long enough that the training and the instinct had become the same thing. She met them in a conference room on the 4th floor of the FBI's Phoenix field office, with a legal pad already open on the table and a pen already in her hand, and she did not offer coffee or small talk. She looked at Raven and she looked at Ford, and she said, "Tell me what you have." So they told her. Raven went first, and Ford filled in the investigative corroboration from his end, and between them they laid out the complete picture in 40 minutes, the documentation on the drive, the 47 names, the pattern of secondary processing designations, the ownership chain Ghost had traced through the LLCs, the 200 million conservative estimate, the 3-state operation, Patricia Holt and the hospital surveillance account, Douglas Merritt and the lawyer who had appeared that morning, and the Scottsdale house that Preacher had followed Holt to that afternoon. Solis did not interrupt. She wrote. Her handwriting was fast and precise, and she covered most of the legal pad, and partway through Raven's accounting of Ghost's work, she reached out and pressed a button on the desk phone and said to whoever answered, "Get me Chen." And when a man appeared in the doorway 7 minutes later, she said without looking up from the legal pad, "Sit down and listen." And he sat. When Raven finished, Solis put down her pen and looked at him directly. "The woman in the hospital," she said. "Emily Carter. She compiled this documentation herself over how long a period? Approximately 6 months of active documentation," Raven said, "after 3 months of observing the pattern before she understood what she was seeing. And the drive is with you now." Ghost set it on the table. He had driven directly from Clara Reyes's house to the field office, arriving 2 minutes before the meeting, started the drive in a clean evidence bag he had brought because he had thought ahead about chain of custody in the way that someone with his particular relationship with information systems naturally thought about chain of custody. Solis looked at the bag. She looked at Ghost. "You're the one who traced the digital trail." "Yes," Ghost said. "I'm going to need everything you did documented in a format that my technical team can verify independently, she said. Not because I doubt it, because it has to survive a legal challenge and your documentation needs to be bulletproof. Already written up, Ghost said, and put a second item on the table, a USB drive. Full methodology, every tool I used, every step time-stamped, everything reproducible. Something moved through Solis's expression that was very close to satisfaction. Good, she said. She looked at the man she'd called Chen. What's your read? Chen, younger 30-something, with the particular focused energy of someone working a case that mattered to him, leaned forward. Honest read. This intersects with work we've been doing for 8 months from the Medicare fraud angle. We've been hitting walls because we couldn't establish the human element. We had financial patterns but no documentation of individual harm and no witness who could speak to the operational mechanics from inside. He looked at the drive on the table. If this has what you're describing, it fills the gap. It fills the gap, Ford said quietly. He had been relatively quiet through the meeting, letting Raven carry it, but now he said it with a flatness that made it something more than an assertion. He had been working his piece of this for 18 months alone, and he was not a dramatic man, but there was something in his voice in that moment that anyone in the room who was paying attention could hear clearly. I have independent confirmation on 11 of Emily Carter's 47 cases from my missing persons work. 11 people. 3 of them had family members who filed reports that went nowhere. 3 of them. He paused. Those families deserve to know what happened. The room was quiet for a moment. Solis looked at the drive on the table. Then she looked at Raven. I'm going to ask you something directly, and I need a direct answer. Ask, Raven said. The woman in the hospital, Emily Carter. Is she stable enough to be interviewed, and is she willing? She's stable, Raven said, and she's been willing since before she was stable. Solis and Chen arrived at Desert Valley Medical Center at 8:15 p.m. They came in separately from the main entrance, no announcement, and Raven had briefed Gerald Park, who had briefed the evening desk staff, so their arrival was smooth and quiet and did not produce the kind of visible federal presence that would have signaled to anyone watching that something significant was happening, because someone was certainly still watching. Dana was on overtime. She had not left at the end of her shift. Nobody had suggested she should, and she had not suggested it herself. She was at the nurse's station when Solis and Chen came through, and she looked at them and looked at Raven behind them, and he gave her a small nod, and she gave one back, and that was the entire conversation they needed. Emily was awake. She had been awake since 6 when Dana had updated her on what Raven had gone to do, and she had been waiting with the particular quality of waiting that belongs to people who have been in danger for a long time and have learned that waiting is not passive. It is a form of readiness, a holding of oneself at a pitch that is neither panic nor complacency, but something precise and alert in between. When Solis came in, Emily assessed her in 3 seconds and said, "You're FBI." Karen Solis, Solis confirmed. "I want to be transparent with you about what I'm here to do and what I'm asking from you. I'm not here to take a statement that goes into a process you don't control. I'm here to have a conversation with the person who did the work, and I want to hear everything from your mouth, in your words, in whatever order makes sense to you. After that, we talk about next steps together. Not my next steps that you get to observe. Together." Emily looked at her for a moment, then at Raven, who was standing just inside the door. "She's the real thing," Raven said. Emily looked back at Solis. "Sit down," she said. "This is going to take a while." It took 2 hours and 14 minutes. Emily talked and Solis listened, and Chen took notes and occasionally asked a specific technical question about a document or a routing code or a timeline. And Emily answered each question with the same precision she had shown Raven that morning. And occasionally she stopped and said, "I need to be honest about this gap," and described it cleanly. And Solis's expression each time Emily did this was one of careful attention rather than concern. The expression of someone who has learned to value honesty about weakness in evidence over false confidence. At one point, Chen said, "The secondary processing code, the one that differentiates patients routed to legitimate facilities from the others, is it consistent across all the documents you found, or does the terminology shift?" "Consistent for the first 8 months," Emily said without hesitating. "After that, there's a terminology shift. They changed the code designation in month 9 of my documentation, I think because someone noticed the old designation was being flagged in a quality review. But I documented the change. I have a memo from the operations director announcing a quote system update in patient routing classification, which is how they explained it to staff. The memo is on the drive. Chen looked at Solis. That memo corroborates something we found 8 months ago, he said. We found a billing code change in the Medicare submission records that matched a date we couldn't figure out what drove the change. We assumed it was a response to an external audit. It was a response to someone noticing, Emily said. That someone was me. I flagged it in an internal quality review, and Gary Stills, the operations director, walked it back within 48 hours. He told me I had misread the coding. I pretended to accept that, and I started documenting everything faster. Solis put down her pen. She looked at Emily with an expression that had moved past professional assessment into something more direct. Ms. Carter, she said, what you did inside that system for 6 months after they already had reason to watch you? Do you understand how unusual that is? Emily looked at her steadily. I understand that people were disappearing, she said. That was the only thing I needed to understand. At 10:30, when the conversation had reached a natural resting point, and Solis had what she needed for the immediate steps, she leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling briefly, and then looked at Emily and said, I want to tell you where we are as clearly as I can. Please, Emily said. What you've given us, combined with what Ford has combined with what my team has been building from the financial side, is enough to open a formal federal investigation tonight. Not tomorrow, tonight. I'm going to call my supervisor from this room. She paused. The formal investigation opening means we can move for emergency asset freezes on the Colton-connected LLCs, which limits his ability to move money or destroy evidence. It means we can subpoena records that we currently can only request. And it means that every hospital, every care facility, and every transport company in this network becomes subject to federal oversight effective immediately. Emily was very still. It also means, Solis continued, that your safety becomes a federal matter, which means resources and protocols that go beyond what's currently in the parking lot outside this building. She looked at Raven briefly and then back at Emily. Not a replacement for that, but in addition to it. What about the people, Emily said? The ones who are still in those facilities. The ones who got routed into secondary processing and are still alive, because some of them are still alive. I know some of them are because I identified care facilities that receive patients, and those patients are documented as still in residence there, but in facilities under Colton's ownership, which means we'll move a welfare check process as part of the investigation, Solis said. Every facility in the network within the next 48 hours. Emily pressed her lips together once. Released. And the families who filed reports that went nowhere. We'll contact every one of them, Ford said from the corner. He had been quiet for a while. He said it with a weight that told everyone in the room that this particular part of the answer had been a long time coming for him personally. Emily looked at him. She had not spoken directly to Ford before this moment. He had been mostly a voice in updates from Raven. She looked at him now and she said, You've been working this alone. 18 months, he said. They reassigned you. They reassigned me, he confirmed. I kept working it on my own time. I have a wife who is very understanding and an insomnia problem that turned out to be useful. Something moved through Emily's face that was not quite a smile. Thank you, she said, for not stopping. Thank you, he said, for finding what I couldn't find from the outside. Sully stepped out to make the call to her supervisor at 10:47. She was gone for 19 minutes. When she came back, her expression was the same controlled professional, giving nothing away. But there was a quality to how she held herself that was different, a very slight forward lean, a readiness that had not been there before in quite this way. It's open, she said. The investigation is formally open. My supervisor has authorized emergency measures effective tonight. She looked at Raven. The asset freeze motions go to a federal judge in the next 2 hours. If the judge signs and we have a good case for urgency, Colton's primary accounts are frozen by morning. Raven let out a slow breath. There's something else, Solis said, and her tone shifted slightly, careful in a new way. My supervisor flagged something when I briefed him. In the ownership chain, your technical person traced the offshore holding structure above Colton. There's a layer that our financial crimes team recognized. Recognized how? Raven said. We've seen that structure before, she said. In a different context, a different case that's been running at the federal level for almost 2 years in a completely separate division. She paused, choosing her next words with visible deliberateness. I'm not at liberty to share details about an ongoing investigation in another division. What I can tell you is that what you found tonight may be significantly larger than a regional elder fraud operation. The offshore structure you identified may connect to something that federal investigators have been trying to build toward for a long time. Nobody spoke for a moment. Ghost, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, said very carefully, when I said conservative estimate 200 million. Stop there, Solis said. Don't say the number again. Not tonight. Not until we understand what we're actually looking at. She looked around the room. What I need from every person in this room is discretion. I know that's a complicated ask given that there are currently, she glanced at her phone, what the news is reporting as 357 motorcycles in the hospital parking lot. I know the story is already public in a certain form, but the specific content of this conversation and what was in that drive cannot go beyond this room until I tell you otherwise. Understood, Raven said. He looked around the room and every person in it nodded. Good. Solis looked at Emily. You are going to need to stay in this hospital for a minimum of tonight and tomorrow. I'm going to have 2 federal agents posted outside your door by midnight. Not because I think there's an imminent threat. She paused. Actually, that's not true. I think there is an imminent threat, which is exactly why I'm posting agents. She held Emily's gaze. Are you all right with that? I'm all right with anything that involves me being alive in 48 hours, Emily said. Dana came in at 11:15 to check vitals and found a room that was quieter than it had been all day. The exhausted quiet of people who have been running fast towards something and have at least temporarily arrived. She checked Emily's blood pressure and oxygen and made a note on the chart and was about to leave when Emily said, Dana. She turned. I want you to know something, Emily said. Did. You could have just followed protocol, called the social work team, left the photograph in the bag, and let the morning shift deal with it. That's what you were supposed to do. I know, Dana said, but you called. I called. Emily looked at her with that direct, unsparing gaze that had been constant since she woke up, the gaze of someone who had learned through difficult experience not to waste words or attention. The first person who helped me wasn't a federal agent or a detective or a biker with 300 friends, she said. It was a nurse at 1 a.m. who made a phone call she didn't have to make. She paused. I'm not going to forget that. Dana stood by the door and felt something she had no clinical term for and would not have wanted one anyway. She said, get some sleep. Working on it, Emily said. Raven came out of the room at 11:40 and walked down the corridor to the end where the window faced the parking lot. He stood there for a moment and looked down. They were still there, all of them. 357 motorcycles, and beside most of them, a person. Some of them were talking quietly in small groups. Some of them were sitting on their bikes. Some of them were standing alone, just standing in the particular way that people stand when they have made a decision to be somewhere and are honoring it by simply being there without needing anything more from the moment than the fact of their presence. Doc came to stand beside him. How long do they stay? Doc said. As long as they're needed, Raven said. Tonight, definitely. Tomorrow we'll reassess when the federal protection is in place. He looked out at them. They came fast. They always come fast when you call, Doc said. No, Raven said. They came fast because of Emily, because I told them why. He paused. I've called before for other things. They come, but this was different. You felt it when they were pulling in this morning the way it was different. Doc was quiet for a moment. Because she's not one of us, he said. She's not somebody's sister or somebody's old lady or somebody from inside the circle. She's just a stranger who stayed, Raven said. Yeah, Doc said. That's it exactly. They stood for a while without talking. Then Doc said, You're going to have to sleep at some point. Tomorrow, Raven said. That's what you said yesterday. Yesterday was a different situation, Raven said. Tonight, I need to be here. Doc looked at him sideways. She's safe, Raven. Federal's on the door in an hour. Gerald Park's people on the building. 357 of our people in the parking lot. She's as safe as anyone can be. I know, Raven said. Then what is it? Raven was quiet for the long moment, looking down at the parking lot. 7 years ago, I was lying on a highway and I couldn't do anything. I was just lying there. And this woman I'd never seen before came and sat down next to me. She didn't ask if I was dangerous. She didn't ask what I was. She just sat down, so he paused. I've thought about that a lot over the years, the specific thing it takes to do that. To sit down next to something you don't fully understand and decide to stay. That's not nothing, Doc said. No, Raven said. It's the opposite of nothing. It's the thing that separates the people who make the world survivable from the people who don't. Doc said nothing, but he stayed standing beside Raven at the window, looking down at the parking lot, both of them present in the particular way you are present when you are somewhere because someone needs you to be there and you know it, and the knowing is enough. The first federal agents arrived at 12:07 a.m., two of them credentials shown to Gerald's Park at the main entrance, escorted to the fourth floor where Emily's room was. They took up positions in the corridor with a professionalism that Gerald Park reviewed and approved with a nod. The nod of one security professional to another. Ghost had gone back to his car and his laptops. He sent a text to Raven at 12:23 that said asset freeze motions filed, judge reviewing, and then at 12:41, judge signed. Colton's primary accounts frozen effective, 12:38 a.m. Raven read both texts and sent one back. Good work tonight. Ghost's reply came in 40 seconds. Not done yet. Still following the chain above Colton. This goes somewhere I haven't seen before. It's big, Raven. It's really big. Raven read this twice. Then he put his phone in his pocket and went back to the chair beside Emily's bed and sat in it, and Emily was asleep, genuinely asleep. Her breathing the steady, deep rhythm of a body that has finally been given enough safety to stop fighting. And he sat in the chair and he kept watch in the way that he had kept watch over things that mattered to him for many years, quietly, steadily, without needing to make it into anything larger than what it was. A man in a chair, a woman who needed to know someone was there, the hours of the night moving past. At 2:44 a.m., Emily woke. Not from a nightmare. She came to consciousness slowly and cleanly, the way you do when your body has had enough rest to take the edge off the acute exhaustion and is now ready to be awake again. She turned her head and found Raven in the chair, and she looked at him for a moment in the way you look at something that has been there all along. You didn't go home, she said. No, he said. You should go home. I'll go home tomorrow, he said. Same thing I told Doc. She was quiet for a moment. Then, how long has it been since you slept? He considered. While ago. She made a small sound that was somewhere between disapproval and affection. Raven, I'm fine. You're 55 years old and you have been awake for almost 24 hours. You've been awake through worse than 24 hours, he said. She couldn't argue with that. She shifted slightly in the bed and winced and then settled. Outside the window, the parking lot was still lit, the shapes of motorcycles visible in the lot, lighting the occasional movement of someone walking a slow circuit of the perimeter. Doc had organized rotating patrols, people keeping themselves alert and keeping the perimeter active. Tell me something, Emily said. Something not about this. Just anything else. He thought about it. My granddaughter started kindergarten in September, he said. Emily looked at him. You have a granddaughter. Clara, she's 5. She has an opinion about everything, and she shares every single opinion she has with full commitment. Something shifted in his face, the full weight of the day lifting for just a moment to let something purely good through. She told me last week that her teacher doesn't know how to read properly because she reads too slow. Emily looked at him, and then she did something she hadn't done all day. She laughed genuinely, the kind of laugh that starts in your chest and moves through you before you've decided to allow it. It lasted only a few seconds before the pain of her ribs cut it short, but it was real and it was complete. And in the quiet of the room at 2:44 in the morning, it sounded like something that had been needed for a long time. She sounds perfect, Emily said when she had her breath back. She's chaos with pigtails, Raven said. She's the best thing I've ever seen. Emily smiled, a real one, unguarded, not the compressed, determined expression that had been her face for most of the day. Tell Clara I said that her teacher is probably doing her best, she said. I'll tell her, he said. She won't agree, but I'll tell her. The room settled back into quiet. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Outside, someone walked a slow circuit of the parking lot perimeter. Then Emily said, when I was in that system, when I was running and scared, And I didn't know who to trust. I kept thinking about you. Not about calling you exactly. Just I kept thinking about the fact that you existed, that you were somewhere and that the world contained someone who I had sat in the rain for 2 years and who had never forgotten it. She paused. It was the one thing that felt like it had gravity. Everything else felt like it was spinning. Raven was very still. I should have called sooner, she said. You called, he said. That's the only part that matters now. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then her eyes drifted closed. She was going back to sleep, the kind of sleep that restores rather than hides, the kind you earn after the worst is past and the next thing has not yet fully arrived. Raven sat in his chair and kept watch. At 7:30 in the morning, the hospital's day shift began arriving, and with it the particular acceleration of a day that had already been in motion for many hours. Solis called at 7:45 with 2 pieces of information delivered back-to-back with no preamble. The first, Richard Colton had retained legal counsel at 6 that morning. His attorney had issued a statement categorically denying involvement in any fraudulent scheme and characterizing the investigation as a politically motivated attack on a successful businessman. The statement was careful and well-crafted and told Raven nothing except that Colton had excellent lawyers who worked early hours. The second, Gary Stills, the Meridian Operations Director, the man whose name appeared on the internal emails Emily had documented, the man whose signature was on the routing code memo, had called the FBI's tip line at 7:12 a.m. and asked about the terms for cooperation. Raven let that land. He's going to flip, he said. He hasn't agreed to anything yet, Solis said carefully. He asked about terms. That's different from agreeing. But her voice carried something underneath the careful language. What I can tell you is that if he cooperates, what Emily documented from inside the system gets corroborated by the man who ran the system. And that changes the evidentiary picture significantly. Does Colton know? Raven said. Unknown, Solis said. Possibly not yet. These things move fast when they start moving. What do you need from our end today? Emily needs to formally record her statement with us. Not just a conversation from last night, a formal recorded interview that can be used in proceedings. Today, if she's able. Raven looked toward Emily's room. Through the window in the door, he could see her sitting up in bed, Dana at the bedside, the two of them talking, Emily with a cup of something in her hand. She looked more like herself than she had at any point in the past 20 hours. She's able, he said. Preacher arrived at 8 o'clock with coffee for everyone who had been there all night. Which was his way. He moved through the world with the understanding that people needed to eat and drink and that someone had to think about this, so others didn't have to. He handed Raven a cup and stood beside him in the corridor and said, "What are we looking at today?" "Federal investigation is open," Briefing said. "Assets frozen. Colton's got lawyers working. The operations director at Meridian may be about to cooperate." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "And Ghost has been up all night following something above Colton that he says is bigger than what we already know." Preacher absorbed all of this with the deliberate patience of someone who has been on many long roads and understands that the last miles are always the most complicated. "How long do we hold the perimeter?" "The federal agents are on the room," Raven said. "Gerald Park's people are on the building. The immediate physical threat to Emily is lower than it was last night." He paused. "But I want us here for at least one more day. I want Colton to see that number in that parking lot when the news cameras come back this morning, and I want whatever he's planning to account for the fact that 357 people are not leaving. Some of them need to get back," Preacher said. "Jobs, families." "I know. Anyone who needs to go goes. No pressure. But if people wants to stay..." "Nobody left last night," Preacher said. "Nobody." He said it simply as a statement of fact with the tone of someone reporting something that perhaps surprised even him. Raven looked at him. "Nobody. I walked the lot at 3 a.m. and again at 5. Every bike's still there." Preacher paused. "Some of them slept in their bikes. Some of them didn't sleep, but nobody left." Raven looked at his coffee. He was quiet for a moment. "Tell them," he said finally, "that I see them. Make sure every one of them knows I see them." "They know," Preacher said, "but I'll tell them anyway." Ghost appeared at 8:45 looking like a man who had been awake all night and was running entirely on coffee and the particular electric focus of someone who has been following something very fast and has just caught it. He came to find Raven and he said without greeting or preamble, "I need to show you something." He opened one of his laptops on the nurse's station counter and turned it so Raven could see the screen, and he pointed. "This is the offshore holding structure above Colton," he said. "I've been unwinding it for 14 hours. It passes through 3 shell company layers in 2 different jurisdictions, and then it terminates here." He pointed to a corporate registration document on the screen. A holding company registered in the Caymans 18 months ago. I couldn't find beneficial ownership information through normal channels because it's structured specifically to obscure that. So I went the other way. I traced the financial flows backward from the Medicare reimbursements and matched them to wire transfer patterns, and then cross-referenced those patterns against SEC filings from the past 3 years. He paused. "Ghost," Raven said, "tell me what you found." "The beneficial owner of the Cayman Holding Company," Ghost said carefully, "has a footprint in SEC filings through a separately disclosed investment position. A small position structured to be beneath the threshold that triggers public disclosure requirements. Except the disclosure requirement was triggered 4 months ago through an unrelated filing, and the position appeared." "Whose position?" Raven said. "A man named Warren Aldis," Ghost said. "He sits on the board of 3 healthcare policy advocacy organizations. He has significant political donations across both parties in 3 states. He's been characterized in business press as a healthcare sector investor and philanthropist." Ghost looked at Raven steadily. "He also sits on the board of directors of the Arizona Department of Health Services Independent Advisory Committee." The corridor was very quiet. "He's inside the regulatory structure," Raven said. "He's had access to regulatory decisions, policy frameworks, and oversight prioritization in the healthcare sector in this state for 4 years," Ghost said, "which would explain why investigations into elder care fraud in Arizona have been chronically under-resourced. Which would explain why Ford's case hit walls. Which would explain why a scheme of this scale was able to operate for 6 years without regulatory intervention." Raven looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he said, "Does Solis know about Aldis?" "That's why I came to find you," Ghost said, "because I don't know whether Aldis is in her chain, whether he has connections to people in the FBI's Phoenix office or above it. I don't know who's clean at what level, and I don't know whether sending this up through Solis is the right move or whether it needs to go somewhere else." Raven stood very still. This was the weight of it. Not the evidence, not the federal investigation already open, not Colton with his lawyers and Stills with his tentative flip. This was the actual weight, the possibility that the thing above the thing was connected to the people who were supposed to stop it. That the wall they'd been running toward had a door in it that opened from the inside. "Give me 20 minutes, Raven said. He went to Emily's room. She listened to him without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for exactly 6 seconds, and then she said, "Warren Aldis." "You know the name," Raven said. "I've seen it," Emily said. "In the advisory committee context. I didn't connect it when I was building the documentation because I wasn't looking at the regulatory layer, I was looking at the operational layer. I was looking at what happened to patients, not at why nothing was done about it." She paused. "But I have seen the name." "Where?" She thought for a moment. "In the secondary processing routing documents. There's a category code at the top of certain routing batches that I never decoded. It wasn't in the operational vocabulary I was working with, so I set it aside. It appears in 23 of the 47 cases." She looked at Raven. "If Aldis is what Ghost thinks he is, that code might be an authorization level. Cases that required sign-off above Colton." "The 23 cases where someone above Colton had to authorize the routing," Raven said. "The 23 cases," Emily said quietly, "that may be the most serious ones. The ones where the assets were largest or the risk of detection was highest." She pressed her hand flat on the bed beside her. "That code is on the drive. Solis has the drive." "Does she know what the code means?" "She can't know what it means unless someone tells her or she figures it out independently." Emily looked at him. "Raven, if Aldis has reach into the FBI's Phoenix office, and that's an if Ghost doesn't know, then telling Solis about Aldis directly is a risk," Raven said. "Yes, But if we don't tell her and she builds the case without knowing about him, then he walks. Yes, Emily said again. She met his eyes. This is the decision. Raven looked at her. At the IV still in her arm, at the bruising still visible along her forearms, the physical record of what it had cost to get to this moment. What do you think, he said, not deflecting, genuinely asking, because she had been inside this longer than anyone and her judgment had been right at every turn. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then, I think Karen Solis drove to this hospital at 8 o'clock at night because Ford told her to, and she came in and she listened to everything and she opened a federal investigation the same night. I think she asked for our discretion and she has kept hers. I think the way she looked at me when I talked about the 47 people. She paused. I think she's clean. I think we have to trust that she's clean. And if we're wrong, then we were wrong with everything we had, Emily said. I'd rather be wrong trying than right by hiding. Raven looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said. He called Solis. Ma, he told her about all this. He told her what Ghost had found and how he'd found it and what it suggested about the structure above Colton, and he told her about the unidentified routing code on 23 of the 47 cases and what Emily thought it might mean. Solis listened, and she did not speak for a long moment after he finished. Then she said, "Where is your technical person right now?" "Here at the hospital." "Bring him to my office at 10 a.m. is flying out," she said. "Not my field office, a different location. I'm going to text you an address." A pause. "And Raven, the person I'm about to call to tell about all this, is not my supervisor in the Phoenix office." "Who are you calling?" Raven said. "Someone in Washington," she said. "Someone who has been working the financial crimes side of something that may connect to what you just described and who I trust completely and who is entirely outside the Phoenix chain of command." Another pause. "You made the right call telling me. The routing code, don't let anyone else see it until I've had a chance to look at it with fresh eyes this morning." "Understood," Raven said. "One more thing," Solis said. "Emily Carter, when she's ready to leave that hospital, and based on what you told me, she'll want to leave sooner than the doctors want her to. She is not going home to her apartment. We're going to need a secure location." She paused. "Do you have somewhere?" Raven almost smiled. 357 people in a parking lot downstairs. "I know a few places," he said. Dwam. At 9:30 a.m., Dana started her third consecutive shift. Nobody told her she had to. Nobody expected it. She arrived at the nurse's station and signed the log and picked up her clipboard, and Dr. Voss, who had also returned on what was technically his day off, looked at her over his coffee and said, "You know you don't have to be here." "I know," Dana said. He looked at her for a moment. He had seen a lot in his 30 years of medicine, and he had learned to recognize when something was happening that was larger than the clinical situation that contained it, when the work was doing something to the people doing it that could not be measured on any chart. He recognized it now. "All right," he said. He handed her a patient chart. "Room 7 needs a new IV line." She took the chart. Then she looked at him and said, "Dr. Voss, what do you think is going to happen to all of it?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think the right people are finally in a room together," he said. "And I think that when the right people get into a room together with the right evidence, things change." He paused. "Slowly, never as fast as they should, but they change." Dana nodded. "And I think," he added more quietly, "that a nurse who made a phone call at 1:37 in the morning is a bigger part of why that's happening than she'll probably ever fully know." Dana looked at the chart in her hand. "Room 7, she said. "Room 7, he said. She went. Down the hall through the window of Emily's room, the morning light was coming in clear, and the 2 federal agents were at their posts in the corridor, and the parking lot below was full of people who had come from across the state and spent the night on their bikes because a woman they'd never met had once done a small and human thing on a rainy highway, and that thing had grown over 7 years into all of this, into the evidence and the investigation and the federal inquiry and the 357 riders who had not left into 2 people in a hospital room at 3 in the morning, laughing about a 5-year-old named Clara who thought her teacher read too slow. The world turned, the case moved, and Emily Carter, who had stayed when everyone else drove past, was finally, for the first time in a very long time, surrounded by people who intended to do exactly the same. Ghost's second call came at 9:47 a.m., 18 minutes before he was supposed to meet Solis at the address she had texted, and the quality of his voice when Raven picked up was different from anything Raven had heard from him in 6 years of knowing him. Not panicked. Ghost didn't panic, but compressed tight, the voice of someone who has just seen something that has rearranged everything and is now moving very fast through the implications. I found the Washington connection, Ghost said. The one Solis said someone there was working. I found it independently coming from the other direction, and Raven, I need you to understand what I'm about to tell you before you react to it. Talk, Raven said. Warren Aldous is not the top, Ghost said. He's a layer, an important one, but a layer. The financial flows above him, I've been tracing them all night, and this morning I finally got through the last shell structure. The money above Aldous roots to a PAC, a federal political action committee that has made contributions to 7 sitting members of Congress across 3 states, all of whom sit on committees that have jurisdiction over Medicare oversight and elder care policy. Raven stood very still in the corridor. This isn't a regional elder fraud operation, Ghost said. This isn't even a multi-state operation with a political protection layer. This is a systematic looting of a federal healthcare program with political infrastructure built specifically to prevent oversight and enforcement. The people at the top have been using their own committee positions to deprioritize exactly the kind of enforcement that would have exposed this years ago. How solid is the evidence? Raven said. The financial flows are documented, Ghost said. The PAC contributions are public record. The committee assignments are public record. Connecting the dots requires some interpretive work, but the dots themselves are hard, very hard. A pause. This is why Solis is calling Washington instead of talking to her own supervisor. I think she already knew there was something above Aldous. I think she's been working toward it for longer than she told us. Or she found out overnight and she's moving fast, Raven said. Either way, she's further ahead than she let on, Ghost said, which might mean she's been protecting us from knowing too much too early. Or it might mean something else. Raven thought about Emily saying, I think she's clean. He thought about the way Solis had said someone in Washington with a particular careful weight of someone who is protecting a source by not naming them. He thought about 18 months of Ford working alone and 8 months of Chen building from the financial side and Solis presumably pulling threads of her own, and all of them converging in a single hospital room last night because a woman named Emily Carter had refused to drive past something that needed attending to. Go to the meeting, Raven said. Don't show her everything at once. Show her what she needs to verify what she already has. Watch how she responds. If she's clean, her response will tell you. If she's not, I'll know, Ghost said. You'll know, Raven confirmed. Call me when you're out. He went back to Emily's room and found her sitting up in bed eating hospital breakfast with the focused determination of someone who understands that the body needs fuel and has decided to give it that regardless of how the food tastes. She looked up when he came in. Tell me, she said. He told her. She put down the fork. She looked at the tray for a moment, and then at the wall, and then at him, and he watched her process it the way she processed everything, not dramatically, not with collapse, but with the intense internal activity of a very organized mind, moving large pieces of information into new positions. Congressional committee members, she said. That's what Ghost's financial trace shows. Named, not to me, not yet. Ghost is taking that to Solis. Emily was quiet for a moment. When I started this, she said, I thought I had found a regional fraud scheme. Something bad but bounded. Something that a police report and a regulatory complaint could handle. She paused. Every layer I found made it bigger. I kept thinking, this is it. This is the top. Now I understand the full shape of it. And then another layer. Are you all right? Raven said. Not medically. He meant the other kind of all right. She looked at him directly. I'm all right, she said, and it was true he could hear that it was true, because it doesn't change what I did. Whatever the full shape of this turns out to be, the evidence I compiled is what it is. The 47 names are who they are. That part doesn't get bigger or smaller. She picked up the fork again. The rest of it is someone else's job now. You've been doing someone else's job for 6 months, he said. Someone had to, she said simply, and 8. Perfect. Solis called at 10:34, 27 minutes after Ghost's meeting with Her was scheduled to start, which meant she had listened to Ghost for less than half an hour before she needed to get on the phone, which told Raven that what Ghost had brought her had moved something fast. "I need to tell you something," she said, and her voice was different, stripped of the careful professional layer it had maintained through last night, not less controlled, but more direct, the voice of someone who has stopped managing and started speaking. "Your technical person walked in this morning with something that corroborates work that a colleague of mine in Washington has been building for 14 months. Financial evidence that we have not been able to close because we couldn't find the originating layer. The Medicare fraud side. He found the originating layer." "Ghost is thorough," Raven said. "He's extraordinary," she said. And she said it without hesitation, which was its own kind of statement. "What he found is, I'm going to tell you that the scope of what this investigation now covers has expanded significantly from what I told you last night. I can't give you specifics, but I need you to understand that Emily Carter's documentation, combined with Ford's case and what Ghost found overnight, is the piece that connects the originating layer to the federal program exploitation. It's the piece that makes the whole thing prosecutable." "She found the human element," Raven said. "She found everything that the financial trail couldn't show on its own," Solis said. "She found the people, the 47 names, the routing codes, the operational mechanics inside the system. You can't prosecute the financial crime without proving the human crime underneath it, and you can't prove the human crime without someone inside the system who documented what happened to those people." A pause. "The investigation that opens this morning is not a Phoenix field office case. It's going to be run from Washington. Joint Task Force. FBI Department of Justice, HHS Office of Inspector General." Another pause, and this one carried something weightier. "Warren Aldis was taken in for questioning at 7 this morning." Raven's hand tightened on the phone. "He was taken in. Federal agents at his home at 7 a.m., Solis said. "He's cooperating. He started cooperating within the first 20 minutes, which tells you something about how solid he believed his position was." Her voice was very controlled. Richard Colton's attorneys were informed of the expanded scope of the investigation at 9:30. His assets remain frozen. He has not yet been formally charged, but that is a matter of time and the clock is moving. "The congressional members," Raven said carefully. A pause. "That is above my current authorization to discuss," she said. "What I can tell you is that the relevant oversight committees in Washington have been notified and that the people with jurisdiction are now in possession of the information they need." Another pause. "It's moving, Raven, faster than anything I've been involved in before. When the right pieces connect, sometimes things move very fast." "What do you need from Emily today?" "The formal recorded statement we discussed, this morning if possible. My colleague from Washington is flying in. She'll be here by noon. She wants to meet Emily herself." "Emily will want to meet her," Raven said. "I thought she might," Solis said. And then in a quieter register, shifting slightly out of the operational mode. "Tell Emily, tell her what she did mattered. I know that probably sounds inadequate given everything, but I've been working toward this for a long time, and I need her to know that what she built, the 6 months she spent inside that system documenting what she found, was what made this possible. Tell her I said that." "Tell her yourself," Raven said. "You'll be here at noon." A brief pause. "Yes," Solis said, "I will." The news broke nationally at 11:15 a.m. Not the full story, not the congressional layer, not the Washington task force, not Aldis in a federal building answering questions. What broke was the regional story, the part that had been building since Preacher stood in front of a camera the previous afternoon and said she sat with him in the rain and she wouldn't leave him there alone. The clip had now been viewed more than 2 million times. It had been picked up by national outlets overnight. By mid-morning, there were journalists outside Desert Valley Medical Center from 4 different networks, and the image that went with every story. 357 motorcycles standing in a hospital parking lot, every one of them still there, had become something that was very difficult to look at and feel nothing about. Dana watched the coverage on her phone at the nurse's station between patient rounds. She watched strangers in comment sections and on social media doing what people do when something real breaks through, arguing about it and being moved by it, and arguing about being moved by it, the complicated human response to encountering something genuine that doesn't fit the categories they'd already built for things like it. She called her sister at 11:30. "Are you watching the news?" her sister said immediately. "I'm at the hospital," Dana said. A pause. The hospital. That hospital. Yes. Another pause longer. Dana, were you there when it started? Were you there last night? Dana looked at the corridor, at the federal agents outside Emily's room, at the ordinary business of a hospital continuing around an extraordinary situation. At all of it, the whole of what one phone call at 1:37 in the morning had set in motion. I was here, she said. Her sister was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line. Then tell me everything. I'm at work, Dana said. Dana, after my shift, she said. I'll tell you everything after my shift. She put her phone away and picked up her clipboard and went to check on Emily. Emily's formal recorded statement began at 12:47 p.m. The Washington colleague Solis had mentioned was a woman named Agent Patricia Duan, 51 years old with 23 years in federal law enforcement, and the particular bearing of someone who has spent those years doing things that required nerve and has not been diminished by the cost of that. She arrived with a quiet efficiency that reminded Emily somehow of a surgeon, someone who had done this enough times that the preparation was automatic, the focus complete. And the work itself was just work, which didn't mean it didn't matter. It meant it mattered so much that there was no room for anything that wasn't the work. Duan shook Emily's hand and looked at her with an assessment that was direct without being invasive and said, I understand you spent 6 months building a case that my team has been trying to build from the outside for 2 years. I had access you didn't have, Emily said. You had something more important than access, Duan said. You had the will to use it when using it was dangerous. That's not a technical resource. That's not something we can provide our agents. That's something you brought yourself. She sat down. I want to hear everything. I want to hear it in your words, and I want to hear it in whatever order feels right to you, because sometimes the order a witness chooses to tell a story in tells us things the story itself doesn't. Emily looked at Raven, who was standing near the window. He gave her a small nod. She looked at Duan. Where do you want me to start? Wherever it starts for you, Duan said. Emily thought for a moment. Then she said, it starts with a name I never found. A man in his 70s. I don't know his name. I only know his case number in the Meridian routing system. Case number 7 in my documentation. He was routed through secondary processing 8 months before I started working at Meridian. He was listed as transferred to a care facility in Tempe. The facility has no record of him. I spent 3 weeks trying to find him. She paused. I never did. But he's why I kept going when it would have been easier to stop. Because I needed someone to at least triage. The room was very quiet. Dwayne had her pen on the legal pad and she was not writing. She was listening completely with the absolute focused attention of someone who understands that what they are hearing is important. Not as evidence, not in that moment, but as something prior to evidence, as the thing that makes evidence matter. All right, she said gently. Tell me about him. The statement took 3 hours and 12 minutes. When it was done, Dwayne sat back and looked at Emily for a moment in silence. And then she said, I want to tell you what happens next. Not the legal process. You'll have attorneys who will walk you through that. I mean what happens in practical terms. She paused. Richard Colton will be formally charged within 72 hours. His legal team will fight hard, and the process will be long, and there will be moments where it seems like nothing is moving. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But the evidence you built, combined with Aldis's cooperation, and what we have from the financial side is stronger than anything I've worked with in my career. And Stills, she glanced at Solis. Gary Stills signed a cooperation agreement 40 minutes ago. Emily absorbed this. He's fully cooperating. Fully, Solis said. He wants a reduced sentence, and he's providing operational details that go further than what your documentation covered. She paused. He named 4 additional facilities that we didn't have, and he confirmed the routing code on the 23 cases you flagged. Emily looked at the wall for a moment. What did the code mean? Aldis authorization, Duan said quietly. Cases routed directly to Aldis for final sign-off because the asset value exceeded a threshold that Colton's operational authorization covered. Aldis personally approved each of those 23. She paused. He approved them, in writing, in the routing system, which means it's on the drive you compiled. I didn't know what it meant when I documented it, Emily said. That's why it survived, Duan said. If you'd known what it meant, and specifically sought it out, they might have found a way to argue it was improperly obtained or selectively gathered. Because you documented everything and didn't know what some of it meant, the legal integrity of the evidence is clean. Emily looked at her hands. The IV was gone now, removed an hour ago when it was no longer medically necessary, and her arms were bare and she could see the bruising. Clearly the old bruising and the newer bruising, the physical record of what the past 3 months had cost her. She looked at it, and she did not look away from it. The 47 people, she said, the welfare checks. Teams are already at 12 facilities, Dwan said. We'll have all 17 in the network covered by tonight. And the families who filed reports. Ford is personally coordinating outreach to every family, Solis said. She said it with a particular quality, the quality of something that has been waited for a long time and is finally being able to happen. He started making calls this morning. Emily nodded slowly. She looked at the window. She could still hear faintly the sound of the parking lot reduced now. Not the full, sustained rumble of the previous afternoon, but present a handful of engines still idling, people still there, some of them who had stayed, and some of them new arrivals who had heard the story and come because hearing it and staying home had felt impossible. When can I leave, she said. Dr. Voss, who had been standing in the doorway for the past 20 minutes with the chart he was carrying as a professional biotech, said, medically, we'd prefer another 24 hours. Emily looked at him. And realistically, he met her eyes over the chart. Tomorrow morning, he said. If you stay tonight, you leave tomorrow morning. Deal, she said. Raven found Doc in the corridor at 4 in the afternoon. Doc was eating a sandwich. Someone had brought food again, the continuous practical maintenance that Doc organized without being asked. And he looked at Raven with the assessment he gave everyone and said, you need to sleep. Tonight, Raven said. That's what you said 20 hours ago. Tonight is different, Raven said. Tonight, Emily's covered. Tonight, things are moving. He leaned against the wall beside Doc. How many of ours are still in the lot? 212, Doc said. Some of them left this morning, jobs and kids, but most of them stayed. He paused. New people coming in, not all our people civilians. There's maybe 40, 50 people out there now who rode up on their own bikes who aren't club members. Just people who heard the story and wanted to be somewhere that felt like they were part of it. Raven looked toward the window at the end of the corridor. What are they doing? Mostly standing around, Doc said. Talking. Some of them brought food and they're sharing it with our people. Gerald Park tried to direct them and then gave up because they weren't doing anything wrong. They were just present. Doc paused. A woman out there, maybe 70, came with her grandson. She's been telling people about her husband. He was in a care facility 3 years ago and he died, and she always thought something wasn't right about it, but she had no proof and nobody listened. He paused. One of our guys has been standing there with her for an hour just listening. Raven was quiet. She heard the story on the news, Doc continued, and she drove here because she needed to be somewhere that someone might listen. That's all. He paused. We're going to hear a lot of that, I think, as this breaks open. A lot of people who knew something was wrong and couldn't prove it and couldn't make anyone care. Ford will talk to her, Raven said. I already told her to ask for Detective Ford, Doc said. She said she'll wait. Raven looked at the sandwich in Doc's hand. Doc held it out. Raven took it and ate half of it, standing in the corridor, and gave the rest back. Clara, Doc said. Yeah, Raven said. Go see her soon, when this is done. First thing, Raven said. The second national wave of coverage hit at 6:30 p.m., and it was bigger than the first, because by 6:30 the story had acquired more pieces. The Aldous questioning, unconfirmed but sourced, was being reported by 2 major outlets. The asset freeze was confirmed in federal court filings that were public record. Gary Stills' cooperation agreement had not been officially confirmed, but enough of it had leaked that 2 reporters were quoting it as a source close to the investigation. And the 47 names, which Emily had not released but which Dwan's team had begun cross-referencing with missing persons databases and family complaint records, had a number attached to them now. That was larger because as the welfare checks progressed through the afternoon, the picture that emerged from the 17 facilities was not the picture Colton's documentation had presented. The number was not 47. Ghost texted Raven at 6:48, welfare check teams reporting. Confirmed discrepancies at 9 facilities. Known affected individuals, now estimated at minimum 180. Possibly more. They're still counting. 180 people. Raven read the text and he sat with it for a moment in the chair beside Emily's bed. Emily asleep again in the early evening, the sleep of someone healing, and he read the number and he thought about what it meant and about the woman in the parking lot with her grandson and her husband who had died and something she had always known was wrong. He texted Ghost back. Don't release that number yet. Tell Dwayne first. Ghost already called her. Raven put the phone away. He looked at Emily sleeping. 180 people, at minimum. People who had gone into a system that was supposed to care for them and had been run through a process described in business language, coded and categorized and routed as though the fundamental indignity of what was being done to them could be contained in administrative terminology. Secondary processing, as though that were a neutral phrase, as though calling it that made it something other than what it was. Emily had found them. She had sat in a Meridian office for 6 months and she had pulled on threads and followed gaps and decoded vocabularies, and she had found 180 people who had no one else looking. And then she had almost died getting that information to someone who could do something with it. And then 357 people had come. Patricia Holt was arrested at 7:14 p.m., Gerald Park told Raven. The federal agents had executed the warrant at her home. She had not resisted. She had opened the door and she had looked at the agents standing there, and she had said, according to the officer who made the call, I've been expecting this. She had been cooperative. She was already talking. Her attorney appointed at her request had advised her to cooperate, and she had agreed before the attorney finished the sentence. Park relayed this with the precision of a security professional and then said she told the agents something they didn't expect. She said she had documentation of her own. Records she'd kept of every instruction she received, every access she was asked to perform, every contact point with Colton's network. A pause. She kept records. For 4 years. Raven stared at him. She kept records. She said she kept them because she was scared, Park said. She said she knew what she was involved in was wrong, and she was too deep in to get out easily, and she didn't know who to trust, so she kept records in case she ever needed them. He paused. She said she accessed the intake database this morning because she was trying to find out whether Emily was still alive. She said she needed to know whether Emily survived. Raven was very still. She said, Park stopped her for a moment. She said she's been afraid for Emily since she understood what was happening to the patients. She said she almost called someone a dozen times. She said she wanted to. Raven thought about a 45-minute window, about a woman who had accessed the intake database at 8:07 in the morning and checked whether Emily Carter was alive, and then left the building and driven to a house connected to Colton's network and spent 22 minutes inside and then driven home. He thought about what those 22 minutes might have contained, about what a woman who kept records for 4 years because she was scared might have done in a house connected to the people she was scared of. Did she make contact with anyone in Colton's network today? He said. Park looked at him. That's what the agents are asking her right now. Ghosta called at 8:02. Patricia Holt went to that house today, he said, to tell them that the access account had been locked and that she thought the hospital was aware of the breach. She told them. He paused. But she also did something else. She told the federal agents, she told them everything she told Colton's people today. Yes, but she also told them that 3 years ago, she witnessed a meeting between Aldous and Colton at a property in Scottsdale. A meeting she was not supposed to know about, and that she documented with her phone photographs of the two of them together with paperwork on the table between them. She has those photographs. Raven closed his eyes briefly. She's been sitting on photographs of Aldous and Colton together for 3 years, he said. Photographs that place them together at a time that corresponds directly to the expansion of the scheme into Nevada and New Mexico, Ghost said. Raven, that's the conspiratorial link. That's Aldous not just as a beneficial owner in a financial structure, but as someone physically present at a meeting about operational expansion. A pause. Duan is being notified right now. Apparently, when they told her about the photographs, her exact words were, I have this from the agent who was in the room. Her exact words were, get them to me tonight. Raven sat in the corridor and he held the phone and he thought about the way things moved when the right pieces connected. About Soli saying it was moving faster than anything she'd been involved in before. About Ghost following a chain for 14 hours and finding the end of it. About Patricia Holt keeping photographs for 3 years because she was scared and guilty and couldn't find her way out, and had finally today, with the parking lot full and the news cameras running and something visibly different about the situation, had finally found her way to a federal agent. "Ghost," he said. "Go home, sleep. I'm almost done with—" "You've been awake for 36 hours, Raven said. "Dwan has the financial documentation and the methodology. Her team can take it from here. Go home." A pause. "Is Emily going to be okay?" "Emily is going to be more than okay," Raven said. Another pause. "Then yeah," Ghost said. "Okay, I'll go home." He didn't sound convinced, but he said it, and that was enough. Dana came in for her last check of the evening at 9:15 and found Emily awake and looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone who is thinking something through completely. "Can't sleep," Dana said. "I was sleeping," Emily said. "I woke up an hour ago and couldn't go back." She looked at Dana. "Sit down for a minute." Dana sat. "How are you doing?" Emily said. It was a genuine question, direct and attentive, the question of someone who has spent the day receiving care and is now in a quiet evening moment turning it outward. Dana was briefly caught off guard by it. People didn't often ask her this in hospital rooms. "I'm tired," she said honestly. It's been a long 2 days." "You worked 3 consecutive shifts." "Roughly, yes." Emily looked at her. "Why?" Dana thought about it. The real answer, not the professional one. "Because I needed to see how it turned out," she said. "I needed to know you were all right. And I needed—" she paused. "I think I needed to be part of something that felt like it mattered. Really mattered. Not in the way that good nursing always matters, which it does, but in the all hands something is actually changing way." She paused again. "That doesn't happen very often." Emily looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "You know what I've been thinking about?" "Tell me." "I've been thinking about case number 7, Emily said. "The first person I couldn't find. The one who made me keep going." She paused. "I still don't know his name. I might never know his name. He may not be in any of the welfare check data because he was early before my documentation starts and the trail might be cold." She looked at the ceiling. "But the investigation is going to look for him. Dwayne told me they'll go back through every case in the routing system. As far back as the records go, they'll look for everyone." She paused. "That's what I've been thinking about. That someone is going to look." Dana was quiet. "That's all I wanted," Emily said. "When I started, that's all it was. I wanted someone to look." Raven came in at 10. He had a coffee he didn't particularly need, and he sat in the chair, and Emily looked at him with the particular fondness of someone who has been watching a person run hard for 48 hours and knows them well enough to see the cost of it. "Stills signed," he said. "Patricia Holt's photographs are with Dwayne. Aldous is cooperating, and the welfare checks confirmed 180 minimum affected individuals across 17 facilities." He laid it all out cleanly, the full day's accounting. Emily listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "And Colton?" "His attorneys issued another statement at 8 o'clock denying everything," Raven said. "He hasn't been formally charged yet. His lawyers are trying to negotiate the terms of whatever comes next. But with Stills, Holt, Aldous in the full documentation package, there's nowhere for him to go. It's a matter of when, not if." Emily nodded slowly. "How long does something like this actually take?" she said. "The prosecution, the full process." "Years, probably," Raven said honestly. "Federal cases of this scope take years. There will be hearings and motions and delays and moments where it feels like nothing is happening." "Dwan told you that?" "She did," Emily said. "I'm okay with years. I just need to know it started." She looked at him. "Did it start?" "It started," he said. She nodded once. That was enough. That was... They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The kind of silence that belongs to people who have been through something together and don't need to fill the space between them. Then Emily said, "Tell me about the day, not the investigation. The people. What happened with the people today?" Raven thought about the woman with her grandson in the parking lot, about the civilians who had come on their own bikes because they heard the story and couldn't stay home, about the man from the chapter who had stood for an hour listening to a widow talk about her husband, about Doc walking the lot at 3 in the morning and finding nobody gone, about Preacher in front of a camera saying she stayed with a simplicity that had moved 2 million people. He told her all of it. She listened with her whole face the way she listened to everything fully present. Nothing performed, taking in each thing he said and holding it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then 357 people, she said, plus the civilians. So more. She shook her head slowly, not negation wonder, the specific wonder of someone confronting a reality that exceeds what they had believed was possible for themselves. I thought nobody would come, she said. It was the same thing she had said to Dana the morning before. But it was different now, said from the other side of 48 hours that had changed the full meaning of the word nobody. I know, Raven said. I thought I had made myself small enough that when something happened to me, it wouldn't. She stopped. I thought I had stopped taking up enough space in anyone's life that my disappearing would just be clean. Quiet, that nobody would be significantly inconvenienced. Raven looked at her steadily. You sat with me on the side of a highway for 2 hours in the rain, he said. Did you think I forgot that? I thought maybe. No, he said quietly. Never, not for a day. Emily pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright in the way that eyes are bright when there is something behind them that will not be cried. Not right now, not in this particular moment, because the moment is too large for any one expression to contain it. You built something, Raven said. 7 years ago, you made a choice that felt small in the moment. And it wasn't small, it became this. He gestured a simple movement that encompassed everything, the room, the corridor, the federal agents outside the parking lot, below all of it. You built this with one decision. We both did, Emily said. He considered that. Yeah, he said. We both did. Emily Carter left Desert Valley Medical Center at 9:20 the following morning. She walked out under her own power. She had refused a wheelchair with the particular polite firmness of someone who has made up their mind and is not going to be talked out of it, and Dr. Voss had looked at her and looked at her chart and said fine in the tone of a man who knows when he's beaten. Dana was at the nurse's station when Emily came through the corridor toward the elevator. Emily stopped. Thank you, Emily said, for the phone call, for the 3 shifts, for all of it. Dana looked at her, this woman who had arrived on a gurney 48 hours ago, with no name and no one, and who was walking out now upright with federal protection and evidence that had shaken a network spanning 3 states and reached into federal politics with 357 people who had come because someone called, and a detective who had kept working alone for 18 months, and a woman in Washington who was going to see this through. Call me when Colton is charged, Dana said. Emily looked at her. You'll be the first call I make, she said. They looked at each other for a moment with the look of 2 people who have been in a foxhole together and will understand each other in a specific way for the rest of their lives because of it. Then Emily walked to the elevator. Raven was beside her, Doc was behind her, 2 federal agents flanked the group at a professional distance. The elevator opened. She stepped in. Darn. Outside in the parking lot, most of them were still there. Not 357 anymore. People had lives and families, and the acute moment had passed enough that going home was no longer something that felt like abandonment. But 140 of them had stayed through the night again and were there in the morning, some of them on their bikes, some of them standing, all of them present in the particular way they had been present from the beginning. Not as a show, not as a performance, not as a statement that needed to be made at anyone in particular. Simply there, because someone needed them to be there, and being there was something they knew how to do. When Emily came through the entrance, someone saw her and said something, and it moved through the group the way things move through groups of people when they are paying attention, fast, person to person, without needing amplification. They didn't cheer. Nobody had organized anything. There was no formal moment. What happened was quieter and more lasting than any organized moment could have been. They turned toward her. The ones who were talking stopped talking. The ones who were leaning straightened. The ones who had their backs to the entrance turned around. And for a moment, 140 people simply looked at her, this woman they had come for. This woman most of them had never met, and whose name they had learned from a phone call that had reached them through a chain of loyalty that did not require explanation. And she looked back at them. Emily Carter stood in the morning light and looked at 140 people who had spent 2 nights in a parking lot for her, and she did not speak because there were no words that were large enough, and she did not cry because she was still holding herself together with the precise, careful strength she had used to hold herself together for 6 months, and she was not ready to put that down yet. But she raised her hand, just that, a simple gesture. Her hand raised open toward them, and 140 people raised theirs back. 12 months later, Richard Colton was convicted on 37 federal counts, including Medicare fraud, elder financial abuse conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 23 years in a federal facility. Gary Stills received a reduced sentence of 8 years in exchange for his cooperation. Warren Aldis, whose cooperation had been among the most extensive, received 12 years the judge at sentencing, having stated clearly that the scale of the abuse and Aldis's position of public trust during its commission made leniency impossible, regardless of cooperation. Patricia Holt received a suspended sentence and 3 years probation with community service, ordered specifically in elder care advocacy, a sentence that reflected both her cooperation and the 3 years she had spent keeping records because she could not find her way out records that had proven essential. The congressional investigation took longer. Federal inquiries at that level always did, but it moved and it continued to move, and the people with jurisdiction continued to move it, and the names that Ghost had found in the PAC contribution records did not remain protected by the distance between them and the scheme below them. Of the 180 confirmed affected individuals, 63 were still alive in facilities connected to Colton's network and were returned to their families or to independent advocacy care. For 117, the investigation came too late. Their families received answers. Not adequate answers. Nothing was adequate but answers. The truth of what had happened, documented and acknowledged in federal proceedings, entered into a record that would exist permanently. Case number 7. Emily's first name was eventually identified through archived records that Stills's cooperation made accessible. His name was Albert Morris. He had been 74 years old, a retired school teacher from Phoenix, widowed with no close family. He had a daughter in California who had filed a missing persons report 3 years earlier and had been told repeatedly that adults could not be tracked through care facility transfers without specific cause for concern. Marcus Ford called the daughter himself. He sat on the phone with her for an hour. She was silent for most of it, and then she said, "I knew. I always knew something happened to him." And Ford said, "I know. I'm sorry we didn't find it sooner." And she said, "But you found it. That's what matters. You found it." Dana Whitfield went back to her regular shifts. She was recognized briefly in the national coverage a nurse mentioned in news reports as the first person to act the woman who had made the phone call. She did not seek the recognition, and she did not particularly enjoy it. And when people asked her about it, she said simply that she had found a photograph with a phone number on it, and she had called the number, and that was what a person did. Ghost slept for 18 hours after the first week was over, and then started a new project, which was what Ghost always did. Doc went home to his wife, who had been receiving updates throughout the 48 hours, with the particular equanimity of someone who has been married to a man with Doc's particular set of priorities for long enough to understand and love those priorities without needing them explained. Preacher's clip was eventually viewed more than 8 million times. He did not watch it himself after the first time. He had said what he needed to say, and that was enough. 8 months after leaving Desert Valley Medical Center, Emily Carter went back. She went on a Tuesday morning, the same kind of quiet hospital morning that it had been when Dana had first heard the ambulance bay doors fly open. She found Dana at the nurse's station she had called ahead. She knew Dana's shift, and she stood there in the ordinary light of an ordinary morning, and she was visibly and completely herself. Not the woman who had been brought in on a gurney, not the woman who had spent 3 months running. Herself, the woman who had sat on a highway in the rain and refused to leave, the woman who had documented 47 names and then 180 names, the woman who had raised her hand in a parking lot and had 140 people raise theirs back. She looked healthy. She looked rested in the deep way, the way that takes months of safety to produce. She looked like someone who has been through something enormous and has come out the other side of it not diminished, but clarified, as though the ordeal had burned away everything that wasn't essential and left what remained more fully itself. She put a small plant on Dana's nurse's station counter, a succulent in a simple pot. "I didn't know what to bring," Emily said. "Flowers die. I thought something that lives." Dana looked at the plant. She looked at Emily. She thought about 1:37 in the morning and a photograph worn soft along its crease lines and 7 words on the back of it, and a phone number and a choice that had taken approximately 4 seconds to make. "How are you?" Dana said. "Good," Emily said. And it was the truest single syllable Dana had heard in a long time. Really good, Hayes. They talked for 20 minutes in the quiet of the morning, the ordinary sacred quiet of a hospital between crises, and Emily told her that she had started working with a nonprofit that advocated for vulnerable adults in healthcare systems, that she was consulting on federal regulatory reform in the elder care sector, that she had testified twice in Washington and was scheduled to testify again in the fall. Are you scared anymore? Dana asked. Emily thought about it honestly the way she thought about everything. Sometimes, she said, less than before, differently than before. She paused. I think I was scared for a long time before any of this happened. Scared of taking up too much space. Scared of being someone who needed people. She looked at the plant on the counter. I'm less scared of that now. Dana nodded. Raven, she said. Emily smiled, the full unguarded one. He brought Clara to meet me last month, she said. His granddaughter. She told me my shoes were nice, but my hair could be better. Dana laughed, genuinely the kind of laugh that surprises you. She sounds perfect. She's chaos with pigtails, Emily said in a tone that made it clear she had borrowed this description from someone and loved it. She's the best thing I've ever seen. They looked at each other across the nurse's station counter, and they were two women who had been through something together and would understand each other in a specific way for the rest of their lives because of it. And there was nothing more that needed to be said about it, and neither of them said anything more about it. Emily picked up her bag. I'll see you, she said. You will, Dana said. Emily Carter walked down the corridor and through the double doors and out into the morning, and she did not look back. Not because the past didn't matter, but because she was walking towards something and she knew it, and the knowing was solid underneath her feet, as solid as asphalt, as solid as the ground you stand on when you have decided not to drive past, when you have decided that the right thing to do is to stay. That staying is the only answer that will ever fully satisfy the question that a person in trouble asks just by being there. She had stayed once on a highway in the rain, and the world, because of it, had come to stay with her. That was not a small thing. That was never a small thing. That was, in fact, everything.